You're on, lovely. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Exhibition Budget Forum live interview. My name is John Ashby. This is the third in our series of Sunday evening live interviews with renowned members of the Fancy. And this is being streamed simultaneously across the internet via Facebook and YouTube. Remember, you can subscribe to the EBF for free, and that's on the exhibitionbudgetforum.co.uk and also our YouTube channel of the same name. This evening, I have the great pleasure of interviewing veterinarian and budgetary fancier Kevin Eatwell. Just a bit of background on Kevin. He's a senior lecturer at the Royal School of Veterinary Studies in Edinburgh. He's practiced veterinary medicine for over 25 years, and on top of his interest in avian medicine and surgery, these interests also cover a wide base of exotic animal species. These include reptile medicine and surgery. He mentors residents in this field for the European College of Zoologica Medicine and has published many papers in this area, collaborating with his residents. Kevin is an absolute boon for the Fancy, especially within the UK. He's been hugely helpful to British fanciers through his Budget Guard Society articles and talks given to budgie societies. Hello, Kevin.
Hello.
Welcome. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. And you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very good. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed tonight. As I said in my short introduction there, I know you share your knowledge so freely, and it's making a massive difference to a lot of fanciers who perhaps would struggle in silence otherwise. So me being one of them. So I think a big thank you for everyone that you've helped in the past, and part of the reason we're doing this interview tonight is to sort of cross-question you again on the various by all means. issues that crop up for fanciers, and obviously spotting sort of clinical signs and maybe allowing fanciers to react quickly. And also what kind of steps they can take to medicate and to cure their birds. So could you, I think I said to you in the lead up to this, this isn't about just me Q&Aing you on illnesses and cures. We obviously want to speak to you as well, because I know you're a keen fancier and have been for many years. And I know you've kept a wide variety of birds. Could you just sort of briefly explain what birds you've kept over the years, please?
Yeah, I mean, a wide variety, I guess, in terms of citizens through to lots of different passerines, softbills, finches, things like that. My family have been in the pet trade since I was a teenager, really. So I got a very good idea of how the pet trade works, I guess, tricks they might use, marketing for products, things like that. So most of the things that are out there I've come across or dealt with, having been involved, like I say, with birds for the past, best part of 40 years. And obviously, breeding budgies since 1989. So yeah, I've done pretty much everything over the years, I think.
Fantastic. And how did you first get into budgerigars? That's the real obvious question.
Yeah, I'd started out actually breeding finches initially, moved into breeding a variety of softbills. I got 3 or 4 first UK breedings with some varieties which even the zoos hadn't done at that time. And then basically my dad at the time was breeding normals and white wings, clear wings, and sort of just got into it that way. Really started out with some Lutinos as pets, just to raise a bit of money to pay for the food for the softbills, to be honest. Obviously, paying for life quite a lot. And then it sort of went from there. Had a local fancier who was breeding crested. They were quite nice birds. He would just come out and give us crest left, right, and centre. So, do you want to have this bird? Breed with it. And before you know it, that was the crested family, started, which I'm still breeding with today. And we did similarly with the recessive pieds. And then before much longer, we started to, I guess, be breeding rare varieties, because my dad wasn't. So we had the Spangles at the time, which were new. Bits and pieces like that going on. When the slates came back, we had those. When the PCBs came out first, we had those. And then basically, as my dad's other partners sort of left the fancy, we ended up joining collectively, or 3 of us. So it was my father, mother, and me, Dad was driving the normals, and we were breeding the crests and rosettes primarily then with the dark eye clears as well. And that's kind of how it all started, really.
Fantastic. And did you have a sort of break from the birds when you were obviously qualifying, or if you had them the whole way through, or?
I was involved for quite a while, but as I've moved around the country with work, it hasn't been possible to have them. So basically, my parents sort of, kept them going, as it were, as sort of the active members of the stud, I guess. And I had to, like I say, obviously take a back seat because of location and workload and children and things. But having taken them back now for 2 years now, obviously I'm starting to look at building them up again, and I guess taking them forward along with a bunch of new varieties I've added, because why make something hard even hard? You may as well just do everything. So that's where it's gone, really.
Fantastic. And what is your favourite variety? Is there one at the minute, or you just anything that's unusual, or?
Mixed bag, really. I suppose at the minute I'm trying to get the fallows going again, which I'm slowly working on this year, building up the clear flights and dark eye clears as well. And both of those are varieties that are, I guess, quite uncommon in the UK still now. And it's nice to sort of try and get those going again, to have something that people can take forward. So that's quite a nice challenge, to get the numbers up and get fresh blood in those, and start working at building up the quality, alongside obviously bog standard normal varieties as well, to use as outcrosses for those. So yeah, I suppose at the minute it's the fallows and dark eye clears, clear flights that I'm focusing on. The recessive pieds being a byproduct of dark eye clear production, I guess. And my dad was also a big fan of dominant pieds as well, so we got I'm building up dominant pieds too at the minute.
Fantastic. Have you tried to keep his bloodlines going since you've kind of taken on the maid stud? Is that's been important to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at the minute, the crested that I'm working on now, they are all descended from the birds I was breeding with as a teenager. Obviously, lots of fresh blood gone in, but they're all back from the family. Recessive pieds and the dark eye clears, same. This is the dark eye clears that are descended from a dark eye clear I bought at the club show actually in 1990, which was one of Galabelle Nasser's at the time. It had bust a quill feather, and so the cage was smothered in blood. Come the Sunday afternoon, we sort of got on the bus and went up, and it just looked completely awful because it was covered in blood. And obviously, maybe people weren't interested. Maybe it was covered in blood and that put them off. But that was the bird I bought, and these are the dark eye clears we've still got today. So yeah, it is important that they are descended from those birds. The normals I'm working on as well, but the quality of them wasn't quite in style with the modern bird where I'd like them to be. So I'm working hard on looking at improving them, bringing them up to show standard again now, but obviously wanting to make sure that they are all descended from those original birds as well, which is an added burden, I guess, but it's an important one.
Absolutely. And how many breeding cages do you run, Kevin? Have you got a massive setup? Can you just explain a bit about what it's like at home?
A very small setup. I hadn't planned on taking the birds back at this stage. So it's a 12x8 shed. In there, 24 breeding cages. I mean, literally, it is just a breeding hut with a small sort of aviary attached with that. So basically, when I'm at full swing breeding, it literally is breeding cages on both walls to get the numbers up. And with the number of varieties I've got, it's needed really to get. I suppose I'm getting just enough for what I want, if that makes sense. There's obviously a minimum sort of level of pairs you need to get any variety established. And so for me, it's just getting I need 5 of this variety, and once I've bred 5, I can move on to the next one. And that's really what I'm looking at the minute.
Sure. Okay, brilliant. So I must admit, I've watched some of your presentations before with great interest. So, and I've got so many questions to get through this evening. And I think there's quite a few myths in the well, there's not quite a few. There's tons of myths in the hobby that I think we could maybe try and debunk a few of the main ones. So with budgerigars, can they exist? I know it's possible for them to exist on a seed only diet, so your canary and your mixed millet, say. How much nutrition is in that seed? I mean, I get the impression not as much as I thought until recently.
Well, I think that's it. I think when we're looking at nutrition of birds generally, I think the main thing that the two main things we've got which drive it from the fancy point of view is you're bombarded with people who want to sell you the stuff that they sell, and they will use whatever method to sell it to you, including getting endorsements from fanciers to do that. And then on the other side, you've got the fanciers who have some nice budgies who breed the birds and happen to breed nice looking birds, and therefore what they do must be perfect and correct, of course. And both of those, of course, are just complete lies. So if you're looking at seed as a food source, it's not great. I mean, there is no vet who is looking at a pet budgie who would go, oh yeah, feed it seed, that's a good idea. Absolutely not. We're all on pellets for complete, balancing the diet out. The downside of seed is they selectively feed, and those of you that are feeding seed mixtures, you'll know they'll be selectively feeding on canary, selectively feeding on white millet, whatever they like, whatever they've been trained to eat or had as babies, they will eat that. And just because they eat it doesn't mean to say it's good. What seed, I suppose, does do is it will supply the energy requirements we need. It does supply enough protein for maintenance. It is deficient in calcium, even for maintenance of normal birds, deficient in vitamin A, deficient in vitamin D, deficient in iodine. And when you kick into breeding, there's obviously a lot more deficiencies kicking in there. But those are the main ones that we should be worried about. A lot of the supplements and things that people use are supplementing things that aren't really a major crisis for the birds in terms of efficiency. And if you think about any animal, really, to be honest, there is quite a massive degree of plasticity in terms of the levels of nutrients you can get and still cope and have a normal, happy, healthy life. What we've got to make sure is we hit that minimum level that they need, but obviously not going over the maximum either to risk toxicity. So yeah, seeds useful.
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, that's okay. But I know I've heard about pellets. Is it Harrison's one of the brands?
Harrison's is one.
It seems to be very popular. It's dead expensive. I mean, what's the advantages over it? I suppose is it just because it's just a complete feed with everything you need in there to avoid over supplementing? What's it, I mean, is it easier to consume for the birds?
Okay, so I think the reason we got to be aware of this, if we're going to do something stupid, at least we should know we're doing something stupid. And feeding seed is stupid. But we know what the main deficiencies are, and we know those are the things you've got to try and correct. Your better branded pelleted diets out there, as you quite rightly said, they are more expensive. So for a large collection of birds, yeah, they're probably cost prohibitive. Bearing in mind also, of course, is if you're the only person feeding them, every new bird that comes in has to learn how to feed a brand new diet, and that's going to be difficult. At the minute, if I put a bird in a show and put a load of pellets on the bottom of its cage, I don't think the show manager would be very chuffed at that, considering that to be a marked cage. And obviously, it's the whole thing of getting the birds used to taking. So if we're going to go down the route of feeding seed, and we know what the main deficiencies are in that for maintenance, and then we know what, I guess, the extra demands of breeding is, and there's quite a lot of data out there on that, then we've got to find ways of compensating for that appropriately with the right supplements or with the right soft food, using products with very, very clear nutritional analysis on them so we can make an objective, balanced decision on what's needed, and I guess have a very good reason for adding something into a bird's diet. And I've seen some fanciers, some very prominent fanciers that are mixing up their soft food, and they're adding like 20, 30 different things into it. And you're like, you've no idea why you're adding that stuff. It just is mind-boggling, the amount of effort people will go to concoct a potion that they have no idea about its content.
And I know we're looking at some of the products I've been recommended and I use. I'll be the first to admit I'm probably the worst at this. But I've started to keep a spreadsheet now where I'm dropping into the sheet what all these products have got, and the crossover with so many of them is really alarming. So what is it, biotin? I looked at what's got biotin the other day. I thought I'm feeding this about 15 times. Well, I was exaggerating, 4 or 5 times. It's so. And I quite agree that we are bombarded with different adverts, and every top fancier will be doing something slightly different, which you go and visit them, you're keen to jump on board. But generally, would you say that fanciers are going mad with some of the supplements, and if they really took a step back and looked at it, they could probably go with just 2 or 3 that would really work for them and give their birds a nut?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at the amount of time and effort and money spent on creation of these things for no apparent reason, and obviously risking toxicity or overloading the birds as well, then that is of concern. So I think for me, if you're looking at formulating, you're going to use seed because we're going to use seed and that's it. Fine, I accept that. But you're going to be feeding a soft food as well during the breeding season. So that soft food to some extent is your access route, providing the birds are trained to eat it, which if they're birds you've bred yourself, they will be because they were weaned onto it, they were reared on it. So the chances are they're going to feed it to the chicks again, and hey presto, the cycle will continue. But what you want to do then is, okay, if I've got a bog standard soft food mix, and if you were going to use some of the commercial brands, for example, if you start looking at big brands of the egg feed manufacturers with the proper nutrient analysis on the side, you pull up 20 different bags, your nutrient analysis is going to be pretty consistent across all of them. You pull up your hand rearing foods, your nutrient analysis is pretty consistent across that. You pull up Harrison's and have a look, your nutrient analysis is pretty consistent. So most of the big manufacturers that have done the research and effort into it, most of the products are very, very similar and balanced. Now, okay, that's a good starting point, I guess, but a lot of those feeds are designed to be the total feed that a bird consumes, which of course it's not. It might be, from best guess, about 25% of the diet the bird consumes. So to some extent, if you've got to then think about the whole diet, and I need to increase my protein or increase my vitamin A or increase vitamin D, there is a logic in adding something extra to that soft feed if the birds are eating it to try and compensate for the fact that 3/4 of the diet they're taking is deficient. And that's what you need to target. Is it's a specific, I want to put this in here, what can I use in the most efficient way to do that?
Fantastic. So, okay. That in itself just poses loads more questions. Without naming names, is there one product out there, and I don't really want to recommend anybody, we'll have to try and work out a way of doing
I can't recommend anybody, and I won't be, no.
No, that's fine. I wouldn't expect you to, and it's unfair on everyone else to if we did. Is there a product out there at the minute that you think, yeah, that's all you need, or is there one or two like that out there? Because I'm beginning to see these on the market, but again, I don't believe any. I tend not to believe a lot of these claims anymore. In fact, I don't know what to believe. Would you say that there's a product out there that I could just put in my soft food with some egg food, mixing with some key vegetables, and that would be it? I've covered all the bases in terms of what my birds need, just particularly at the peak of the breeding season when they're most in need of it.
The honest answer is no, there isn't, because a lot of the products you're looking at using, if you're going to looking at adding a supplement, it's very difficult to get one that ticks all of the bases. There are some out there that do, but it's very difficult to find one that does the whole thing. And equally, to some extent, is do you need a supplement or do you need to choose on the right food source? So there are some better ones out there that are clearly labelled that say, yeah, this is what I contain and it's got things that you want. But a lot of the supplements, again, are based on the amount that birds need in the diet as a whole, not as a supplement or an additive to the diet, if that makes sense. So yeah, I suppose there are a few out there, but I guess what you've got to look at is if you're adding fresh fruit or veg to this and other bits and pieces going in, what are they providing? What are they bringing into that mix? And that might then reduce your need for supplementation because you're getting, extra vitamins and things from those things going in. So I think, to be fair, without mentioning a single brand, because there isn't one, you probably need to be looking at something that's going to get you some calcium and vitamin D in there, something that's going to get you vitamin A in there, and probably ought to be thinking about protein a little bit as well for your birds. And if you're covering those bases with a couple of supplements maybe, or just maybe adding something extra into the soft food to boost up the protein level, then that's probably okay. And there are some of the better brands out there, I guess, that are marketing products that are probably okay, but the vast majority don't have the nutrient analysis to back up their what is unsubstantiated claims.
Do we know why they haven't? Why some of these products haven't got that on the packaging? Is that
it costs about £3,000 to £4,000 for a detailed nutrient analysis?
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So we suggesting they formulated a product and then not analysed what this.
So if you were to create a product, and if you're in the human market, for example, then nutrient analysis, or at least a basic nutrient analysis, is part of the requirements for that. In the veterinary in food manufacturers, particularly on the small companies that we're doing, is it economic if you manufacture a product just for the budgie fancy, which is very small, and it's going to cost you $4,000 to get version 1 analysed, and you go, oh, I'm a bit deficient in vitamin D, I'm going to have to run it again, that's another $4,000.
Okay.
So it is cost limiting. So when you're looking at a lot of the analysis that the products do have, saying, oh, it contains all of this, and it's like, yeah, that's only because you've added cod liver oil to it, you've added carrot to it, and they had some. But what is actually in the final product at the point of sale, you've no idea. And obviously, the more detailed the nutrient analysis they go into, the more costly it is. So if you just did a basic protein and you did a vitamin D and something else, that's great. But if you want to start breaking it down into amino acids and everything else, like you would get on some of the big brands where they have done that, where you get your nutrient analysis with 20, 30 items, that's big money, and that's why these little companies can't really do that. But the alternative is they just make wild claims, and then Breeder X says this is amazing, and before you know it, they've got a product marketed with no evidence whatsoever to back up the nutritional analysis.
Fine, okay. And I suppose sometimes with our birds as well is that you can't always, obviously there's you talk about toxicity and there will be some signs that your birds are suffering perhaps, but I suppose and I think it's maybe an analysis you've used before, is that because we can't see what's going on with the birds, I mean, if they put weight on, we know we're doing something wrong. But generally, you can't always see with the birds whether the diet you're giving them is an Olympic type diet, or whether it's your McDonald's diet, is it? You can't, unless the bird is really fat, you can't see, can you? So I suppose that's the big problem.
And we do know that birds, if you force the issue with them and they're on a seed-based diet, then you probably could get them to breed quite happily just on seed for, well, the general sort of gist is 2 rounds maximum. At that point, they tend to crash and burn. And your main concern here, obviously, is being the hens with particularly calcium point of view from trying to lay a clutch, because they have a rapid cycling of calcium around at the point of egg laying to produce an eggshell. So much as they will breed on a poor diet, they run out quite fast. And I guess it would be unusual perhaps for people to reach the point of toxicity because of what they're doing, but I suspect they are wasting a lot of money and a lot of time throwing products at the birds when they're just trying to supplement things that don't need supplementation. It's silly things like, I've noticed somebody this week getting all excited about how to get vitamin C into the birds. It's like they make their own. It's only primates and certain bird species and certain mammals like guinea pigs or capybara that can't make vitamin C. Everybody else does and copes quite fine. So vitamin C is something that's just not of interest to some extent in the birds because they make their own. But people are panicking and they have to have a supplement for it because we need a supplement for vitamin C. It's like we work differently.
So they're looking at their well man or well woman in the cupboard and then trying to work out from that whether what the birds.
Because they know vitamin C is important to them, so it must be important to the birds. And yes, it is, but they make their own.
Well, that was amazing. Well, I didn't know that, so that's that's another thing I've learned. Brilliant.
The interesting thing is that there are some bird species that don't, and one of the bird species that don't is the bulbuls, the pycnotus. And that was the species I bred as a teenager, or the best part of 20 years. And those you do have to supplement vitamin C because it's one of the bird species that can't make their own. But other birds are tickety-boo and does it themselves.
Fantastic, brilliant. Okay, so that's one I can cross off my list when I'm looking for the next magic potion. So in terms of fruit and vegetables, I mean, I see long lists shared all over the place. I know everyone has always said don't feed lettuce, and with some of the dark greens, such as your curly kale and your spinach and your broccoli, maybe some of those are better than others. Is that correct? What vegetables are the best? Should fanciers be putting in their soft food? Ideally, that's the short way of putting it.
Okay, so most of the plants out there don't necessarily want to be eaten, if that makes sense. That's not the point. So there are lots of anti-nutrient factors in plants, and there's two main ones that we're worried about, and these basically are oxalates, and the oxalates bind calcium. So as much as they might have a calcium analysis and say, oh, look at all this amazing calcium I've got, if you can't absorb it because of the oxalates, then that's kind of pointless. It all boils down to how well you can digest something. And the other anti-nutrient factor is really the goitrogens, which block iodine uptake. And those are the main two that worry us, is calcium and iodine, both of which we know are obviously important for the birds. So if you're going to feed veg that will actively bind those two, and this is something you do every day, for example, and then that's of concern. And the main ones there really are the brassicas. So things like your curly kale, broccoli, all those sorts of things, they're the ones that we were worried about oxalates and goitrogens in them. And there certainly are cases in a variety of different species, not just the budgies, where things like that being fed to herbivorous species have caused problems. So in moderation, I think they're fine. Let's give them a bit today if you wanted to, that's fine. But those are the ones that I would be avoiding as a part of the staple diet because of those anti-nutrient factors. And again, the question is why are you adding them in there? For me, if I'm going to add veg into or fruit or something into a mixture, okay, fruit's mostly sugar and water, not a lot else going on there really. But if you're looking, saying I want to add veg that got vitamin A present in them in quite a high amount, then that is something that's very valid. And that then you can start enriching for carrots, which everybody feeds anyway, which is pretty good. But beyond that, I think you're just choosing something because you can. And okay, it might increase palatability, it might increase moisture content, but in most cases, vegetable protein sources that you're going to be using, they don't have enough of a kick in terms of protein amount to push it that you need for rearing a nest of 4 babies, for example, that are rapidly growing. So for me, I guess if you were going to choose a vegetable to add carrot. It's got vitamin A.
Okay, so stuff like peas, I know peas and sweet corn seem to be very popular as well. I mean, I'll be being honest, my soft food is just mostly carrot with egg food, and then all the other bits and pieces that I sprinkle on top. But yeah, I see sweet corn, peas. They seem to be two of the popular ones. In terms of nutrient content in those, are they worth adding really, or are they?
Not particularly. I mean, I don't really have any. It boils down to what percentage you're adding and what you're finally going to create for your soft food, and that boils down to quite an individual thing where you need to look at what the amounts you're adding, what you think your birds are feeding, have the nutrient analysis of each component, put it all together and see if it comes up and makes sense, as a balancer for your seed, which is really what we're talking about. So I've got no objection to those being fed. I don't think they bring a lot to the table. That makes sense, in terms of it. And so for me, I think for a lot of the veg that we put in the toffee, it literally is something to colour it, something to increase palatability maybe. But from a nutrient point of view, I'm really thinking, okay, this is just going to get them to eat it. And if I want to push protein or extra calcium, things like that, then I've got to look at something different in there to add to that.
Fine. Okay. So So with grit for budgies, so I've just got this long list, so I'm going to try and stick to it on jump
carry on.
So with grit, some fancy feed grit, some don't. Do budgies need grit?
No,
they don't. They don't need any in their gizzard at all to break down seed. No,
because they dehusk it. Now, okay, depending on what grit you're feeding, some of the grits that are dissolvable or ground down by the gizzard may, if you're lucky, prove a calcium source for them. That's a different story. But then again, if you want to feed them grit and have them feeding bits of rock that they have to grind down versus just giving them straight calcium carbonate, it's a no-brainer in terms of ease of uptake and absorption. So yeah, they don't need grit. Absolutely not. Mine don't have grit. There's no need for it. It's an extra bowl that just creates mess and cleaning and things. So yes, there's no need for it.
Fine. And in terms of cuttlefish as well, everyone loves a cuttlefish. I know they have great fun keeping their claws and their beak shorts on there, and I assume there is some calcium in there. Should people be feeding those? I mean, as a kind of stress reducer as well, I suppose they have some relevance. But in terms of cuttlefish, what's the advantages of those?
Well, budgies actually naturally they go running on the beaches to eat dead cuttlefish, as you know, on a daily basis. That's what they do. So the tortoises and giant African land snails, you can see them all plaguing the beach looking for cuttlefish carcasses to get their calcium. I am joking, just for the record. No, it's pointless. I wouldn't do it. You're looking at that as a calcium source. You're adding it as something separate. Now, you know as well as I do, John, your birds will be fixated on the food they're feeding. Some will go and chew the calcium on the cuttlefish. Others will just use it to collect poo. And that's what they'll do with it. So your intake is incredibly variable. You cannot rely on that as a calcium source for your birds. Does it give them enrichment? Maybe. I don't know how much they enjoy messing about with cuttlefish. It may do, but it is not a reliable calcium source. My birds don't get cuttlefish. My birds get calcium carbonate added to the soft food at the right amount that I want. It's mixed in there evenly, so I know I've got a better chance of them getting what I want them to get from that. And cuttlefish is just, again, waste of your money.
Fine. So with calcium carbonate, I know, say from other presentations, I know you're big on that, and I think you put 50 or 60 grams into your soft food mix each time you give it to the birds. Yeah. So obviously that, I mean, it's effectively chalk, isn't it? I mean, that's it. So you sprinkle that in, and obviously, and the big question is the vitamin D3, because I know that's the key for being able to metabolize the.
Well, if we just go back to calcium just for a second before you jump onto vitamin D yet, John. In terms of seed, the calcium percentage in seed is 0.05%. Maintenance for a budgie is 0.85% of the diet. Okay, so seed is massively deficient there. And if I'm laying eggs, so I'm a hen that's just gone into pairing up, for example, and I'm going to lay a clutch of 7 eggs, and I want my eggs to be of, I guess, good quality, because a good quality egg has a chance of being fertile and hatching. If my shell is porous or damaged, then that embryo is not going to survive, whether it's fertile or not. So for an egg-laying hen, her value increases up to about 1.25%. So, if you're looking at your seed as essentially having nothing, we can just say it's got nothing of relevance in terms of calcium to play with that. If you're looking then and saying, okay, if my hens need 1.15% in their overall diet, and let's suggest as a ballpark, a quarter of their diet is soft food, 3/4 is seed, but I've got them trained to eat my soft food. So, they're going to eat maybe 2-3 grams of that a day, and they're going to eat, 8 grams of seed or something a day. Then if I want to get 1.15% overall, my soft food has to have 4 times that amount. It's got to get close to 5% calcium within that. Mm-hmm. Your most concentrated source of calcium available is calcium carbonate, and that's 40% calcium. So if I want my diet to have 5% calcium in it, there or thereabouts, and I've got a product that's 40% calcium, assuming my soft food and everything else is bit of egg, bit of carrot, something that doesn't have much soft food in it, then that probably needs to be about 10% of that intake to match that level that the hens need for laying. They don't need so much for rearing, but again, it boils down to, are you going to try and then have different soft foods for different life stages of your birds, which you're not. You've got to have one soft food treats all, and you should be feeding that, to be honest, as soon as you pair the birds up, because this hen is going to need 2 weeks of running to get the calcium stores before she starts laying. So on that basis, if you're looking at having a soft food with 5% calcium, that's what you're aiming at. And bearing in mind, even if you're using a soft food, a commercially available soft food as a baseline, that again is pitched as the whole diet. And you'll read on the analysis there, that'll be 1.15% calcium, because the assumption is that's the sole food. Hand rearing food for the chicks will be at that same level, because that's the only food they're getting. We're talking this is a quarter of the diet, not the whole of the diet. So you've got to compensate for that. And that's where the calcium carbonate is a very easy way of doing that. And most of your commercial calcium supplements out there, it's just limestone flour. They've just branded it and stuck a label on it and makes it look very exciting and more expensive.
Excellent. Oh, well, that's excellent. Okay, well, that's you're right. Yeah, because you do. I never think of it in those terms, where with your stock foods, it's only becomes a small proportion of what they're feeding the birds. And particularly with the youngsters as well. I mean, do they need, how much calcium do they need? Do growing chicks need more calcium than adult birds in terms of the overall proportion of what they're being fed and intaking?
Not much, actually. No, they're pitching more like the 1% as opposed to 1.25%. It's the egg laying on the hens that takes the toll on those. And like I say, a hen probably has a degree of reserves, even from a seed-based diet, that she's hopefully managed to eke out over the year, that she could probably go and lay a first clutch probably okay. So there is a requirement isn't so much for the rearing chick, but you've got to pitch in with a diet that, you know, in an ideal world, I guess you'd have a diet designed for an egg-laying hen in the first, you know, until she's finished laying the clutch, as it were, from as soon as she's paired up. You'd then go, great, I can switch to a diet now for rearing the chicks until the chicks are just about to fledge. And I'll switch back to the calcium laying diet for the hen, you know, once the chicks are fledged, because you're going to be laying soon. And reality is you're not going to do that. That's not going to be practical. So you've got to come up with a formula that catches, I guess, to some extent, hopefully, some of the protein. You're not going to match all of the protein requirements for a full nest of growing chicks, but you're going to hopefully pitch somewhere in the ballpark that's not far off that. But then you probably do need to pitch at, it's got to have enough calcium for that hen to lay a nest. Okay, there's a bit extra when the birds are being reared, but that's not going to do any harm. I just need to, again, reach that minimum level that hen needs.
Because apparently the hens will strip the calcium out of the internal parts of their bone structure. Is that right, to produce the egg? So, okay.
So what all birds do, and Tyrannosaurus rex for that matter, for those that are interested, they have medullary bone, and so what they do is, as they progressively store their calcium, they put it into this bone store, which is sort of like a lattice work within the bone as acting as a temporary calcium store. Then when I come to lay an egg, I strip that store out, chuck it into the eggshell, and then over the next 24 hours, I've got to reload and refill that calcium store ready for egg number 2. So this boils down to, and again, we ought to come on to vitamin D in a minute as well, but this also comes down to, if I'm laying eggs and I've got to build up a calcium store, I burn that match on egg number 1. I've got to reload it, burn it on egg number 2, and I repeat that over, say, let's say over a fortnight for 7 eggs. If I'm giving my calcium and vitamin D once a week, what happens to egg 2, 3, and 4 before I give it again? Because you've had it on the first day, but for the next 7 days, you haven't got any going through. So, you know, this is, you know, the whole point for this is, if you're breeding, this is something you need on a daily basis. You can't give it once a week. So the only way you're going to achieve this practically is in your soft feed, because you're feeding that daily, and that's the only way they get that. And again, you know, this, I give it once a week, I give it once a fortnight. Well, that's all very well and good, but your bird, when she's breeding, needs it daily.
What about calcium in the water as well, that we've got naturally here? Is that, do we consider that, or are they at such small levels, would you say, that we don't need to include those necessarily in our kind of provision calculations?
I wouldn't really consider hard water to be a major source for what we need. I suppose the question you've got, and this is one of my other major concerns, if we're going to move on to things like vitamin D and other supplements in the water as well, one of your main concerns you've got there is, as soon as you add anything into the water of the bird, whether it be a vitamin, mineral supplement, or a medication of any sort, as soon as you change that water consistency, the first thing the bird will do is go, I'm going to drink less. I'm a you know, arid species. I can cope with dehydration and lack of water. I'm very good at that. That's what I do. So as soon as you put something in that I don't like, I'm not going to drink it. So, you know, again, if you're looking at wanting to give a continuous source, and we said, okay, we need calcium on a continuous basis, you can't give calcium every day to your birds solidly through the breeding season if that's how you're going to do it in the drinking water, because A, they won't drink so much, and B, you're probably going to want to stick something else in there, aren't you? So let's be honest, people do. They want to do everything, something on a Monday and something on a Wednesday, and then there's something else on Friday, and don't forget the apple cider vinegar on a Saturday, and you know, before you know it, you people just aren't doing it on a daily basis. So your soft food is a way of doing that, whilst allowing the birds to drink the amount that they want to drink without it being tainted. And when they're rearing chicks, for example, that water consumption will increase. And that does then mean the amount that you're putting in of any medication in water for any bird, to some extent, is dependent on how many mils I drink per kilo of body weight. And the amount that a budgie will drink in mils per kilo body weight is completely different to a pigeon, for example, or a passerine like a zebrafinch, or what have you.
So you don't give any supplements in your water at all. Presumably some medication if and when needed, but nothing in the water. It's all loaded into your bird's soft food.
Yeah, everything in the soft food.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
the only thing I probably would put in water would be iodine, perhaps. That's probably the only thing that I would reach for an in-water supplement there. And it's at such a low level, it probably doesn't influence their drinking anyway, the amount that you're adding.
But you won't put the iodine into the soft food at all? Is that because it's unpalatable?
No, it's just for me at the minute, and it's probably me just being a bit twitchy. You're adding a very small amount of iodine into your drinking water, which obviously can spread quite evenly. If you're adding a couple of drops into soft food, my concern is how evenly that's being spread throughout the soft food, which is why at the minute I'm sticking with it in water. What I probably should be doing is altering the moisture content of my soft food a bit better so I can dilute it down to get an even spread. What you don't want, I guess, is a hotspot of supplement in your soft food. You want it to be spread evenly across everything, if that makes sense. And with a small volume being added into it, it's more difficult to guarantee that spread evenly across, your entire.
Understood. I suppose if it's powder form, you can sprinkle across, can't you? And as you say, you won't get those hot spots, right?
Yes.
Understood. Good. Sound advice. So, I mean, you mentioned. Well, actually, let's come on. Let's do the D3 bit, because that's the key element, isn't it? With the calcium. Yeah. Is there any vegetables or fruit that you can get? You've obviously got the daylight, the sunlight, in which your birds can gather from their outdoor aviary. If you've got one, which not many fanciers have, I don't think. I think you've got the option of a daylight bulb, which I must admit I'm trying. I have tried. I'm trying that in my flight and on sort of the darker areas of my bird room. Is there any fruit and vegetables that you can use that will give the D3 you need, or is it purely through the supplementation of D3 or through sunlight, be it natural or through the bulb?
So I suppose natural sunlight's great, depending obviously which country you're in. It has to be direct and unfiltered. So you've got to be in an outside flight. You've got to be in an outside flight with no plastic on the roof, probably, to get adequate amounts in. And that's fine. But I don't know many people these days that would be having an outside flight that's uncovered. If your perches are covered for the purposes of keeping them dry in the rain, but the middle bit's open, that's great. But your birds aren't hanging on the wire in the middle bit there trying to get sun that way. So natural UV is probably quite limited. If you're looking at artificial UV, it has to be close enough to the birds, and that's within 6 to 8 inches. So we're not talking putting a light in the top of the aviary here or putting a light in the shed. If you want to get UV light into your birds, they have to have it exposed from 6 to 8 inches. So for mine, they're running strip lights in between the breeding cages. So they literally have a wire cage with the lights between them. In a wooden cage, maybe if you run it across the front at the level on the front above the door, you get enough going in that way. But in many cases, if you do want to give them artificial UV, you've got to plan that before you build your bird in the first place. And to be honest, wire cages are the way to go to get the exposure you need. Failing that, then you're looking at, I've got to get a dietary source in here that I can trust and rely on. Now, you're then down to, I suppose, 2 ways of getting vitamin D into your birds. The levels that we need, again, just look at your soft food mix, look at your hand rearing mix. It's about 1,500 international units per kilo of food. Most in water recommendations is 1,500 international units per litre, similar sort of level. But it's either they've got to drink it or you add it to the food. There are lots of supplements out there that have vitamin D added to them, so you can buy a calcium carbonate supplement with additional vitamin D3 in, and those are quite commonly marketed. And so they are more expensive than straight calcium carbonate because they've got vitamin D added to them. And again, then you've got to look and say, okay, how much is in this product per kilo? what am I trying to achieve in terms of my soft food, what levels do I want, and you then work out how much you need to add per kilo of your soft food to achieve that. And I don't think I could probably place hand on heart and say that absolutely zero fanciers are actually calculating how much supplement to add to a kilo of soft food. I mean, they're just getting a salt shaker and chucking some in and going, oh, I put a sprinkle of that and half a teaspoon of this. It's like, you've no idea how much you're actually adding or why. You haven't calculated how much you need to add to that mixture. Well, of course, one of the old favourites, both you and Ricky are probably far too young to know, but I don't, we used to use cod liver oil back in the day, 30, 40 years ago. Cod liver oil was one of these things that, in the days of when metabolic bone disease was an issue in people, that's what you used to feed your children. They'd come along and have a teaspoon of cod liver oil and they used to hate it. That's got plenty of vitamin D and vitamin A in it. It's a very cheap and cheery source. It depends on quality, but you do have that there straight away that you can add. So yeah, my birds get calcium carbonate and cod liver oil.
Okay.
I don't use a commercial supplement.
Because I know there's one of the I use like a horse product that's got cod liver oil in it, because it's kind of almost, it's powdery and dry. But that would work fine. If it's got cod liver oil in, it's got cod liver oil in, I assume. There's no difference in whether it's dried or.
No, I mean, you want it in a format that you can mix evenly and guarantee it's spread throughout the soft food evenly. And a lot of the human products are in gelatin capsules, which obviously are quite limiting. And a lot of the cod liver oils out there, again, it depends on quality, but a lot of them they're all the same. They just put a picture of a horse on the front, or they put a picture of a dog on the front, this sort of type of thing. So it doesn't really matter. But again, try and choose a product that has nutrient analysis that says, okay, this is the vitamin D content in this product per litre or per mil, versus ones that just say, oh, I contain it, but they haven't actually done the analysis on it. So it does boil down to quality of product. But yeah, cod liver oil is cod liver oil. It doesn't matter what animal's stuck on the front of it.
And it's vitamin D3, isn't it? There's no D3 with any other suffixes at all. It's just D3.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. And you mentioned apple cider vinegar as well. Do you give that to your birds? Is there any massive, huge advantage on that in that it stops the sour crop, or is that one a bit of an old wives' tale that perhaps people persevere with?
I don't use anything like that in the water for my birds. I think a lot of the reasoning behind these products, I suppose it's twofold. One is trying to, as you said, stop sour crop. Okay, great. How do you perceive that's working, John? What does it do by acidifying the water to stop sour crop?
I don't know.
Okay, so very eloquent point you just made there for the benefit of the viewers. Thank you very much. Okay, so I suppose the question is, you want good quality water going. Good quality water. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You want clean water going through. If your water's tainted or contaminated or has a high bacterial load or decomposing food in it, then your risk of getting bacterial growth in that, in the water is quite marked. So acidification of that to some extent might limit that, using things like dilute, disinfectant in there, for example, which some people would do of certain brands, same sort of type thing. We're trying to reduce the bacterial load. Well, just give them clean water then. Just have sufficient drinkers and dishes that you can swap them on a daily basis to give them a clean water source. That's basic essentials of management, really. And I think if you do that, I don't think you need to be acidifying it. No.
Because what is sour crop? Can you explain what that is precisely? Is it? I've heard of it. I have no idea what it is. Is it a?
So sour crop basically is just a layman's term for a crop that's gone. If you like it's got bacterial or yeast growth in it that's causing gas formation. The birds can sometimes vomit and regurgitate. They can get quite sick with it as well. So sour crop, really, all that is bacterial or yeast overgrowth, and in many cases that will be food in origin that's come into there. We don't see sour crop per se as an individual thing in the birds so much as an issue. The main thing we'd have in the crops of birds would be trichomonas, of course. But sour crop certainly something we do see in other species, and like I say, acidification of drinking water is one of those things people use for that, but just give them clean water.
Right, okay, but it doesn't, because avian gastric yeast is trichomonasis, isn't it? So but apple cider vinegar doesn't cure that or prevent it at all?
No. Well, they're two different things you just mentioned there in the same sentence, John. So your avian gastric yeast is Macrorhabdus. Trichomonas will be your canker, basically. So two different things.
Oh, they are different. Okay, my mistake. Sorry. Okay. Thank you for correcting me there. Okay. So we talked about iodine. And where is it? I've got a prop this week. Is that the one you give?
I'm not going to endorse any product at all, but a liquid iodine product like that would be suitable.
Fine. And how often do you give the iodine? So potassium iodide and kelp there. And it's got sodium benzoate as well, which is interesting because I know some people feed that for megabac. Well, again, it doesn't say what the quantity. It doesn't say what the quantity of sodium benzoate.
Sodium benzoate, John. Sodium benzoate is a fungistatic food additive.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a vast majority of foods that you are taking or eating yourself, or products that are sold for people, will have sodium benzoate added to stop fungal overgrowth in that food, and that's where sodium benzoate is used. It's used as a food additive. So it's present in lots of products to stop overgrowth of fungi in that product. So the sodium benzoate in the iodine formulation you've got there, it's just to stop fungal overgrowth in that formulation. So, but if you start hunting on the nutrient analysis of your microwavable meal from whichever supermarket you go to, you'll find sodium benzoate there too. So yeah, it's just a food additive.
But I know there's a number of fanciers. This has been discussed, I think, at length on the EBF before, where they've fed it, they've given it in water. I know it's the food grade version of it. They put it in water and treat their flock sort of twice a year just to keep the megabac away. In your experience, does that have any benefits? Is that proven yet that it does reduce megabac?
There is one paper looking at sodium benzoate in water at a rate of half a gram to 1 gram per litre. Actually, they used, and that did show an effect at reducing the levels of avian gastric yeast in budgies at that dosage rate. These were non-breeding birds with no other water sources, no soft food, things like that. So it does have an effect on reducing the level down a bit, but it's not a cure, if that makes sense. You're just trying to do.
Okay, so there's not loads of evidence that it's worth using that, but it's not doing the birds any harm if you run them on it for. Mind you, I think you have to. I'm sure one of the guys on the forum was told you had to give it for about 3 weeks to daily, just for it to have a positive effect on his birds. But there's no harm to the birds giving it to them.
No, there's no harm to the birds doing it, and it does reduce the levels down. And like I said, there is some genuine science and peer-reviewed research looking at that. And yeah, you probably do want to be doing 2 or 3 week period. What the impact of that is long term over a year, for example, is unknown. If I treated my birds for 3 weeks of sodium benzoate and I looked at the avian gastric yeast level 6 months down the road, would it be any different to a group of birds that didn't have that given to them for 3 weeks? And it probably would be no real difference whatsoever. But a lot of people do, and it's not doing any harm. And there is some evidence to suggest that it does work. So yes, by all means do. And it doesn't cost a lot. You've just got to make sure you buy the formulation that will go into the water nicely. You're using it in non-breeding birds, and you're getting your concentration right.
Fine. Okay, excellent. Garlic in the diet. Should we be giving garlic to our birds? Is there any real benefit in that respect?
I don't believe there is any point in giving them garlic.
Right. Okay. All right. That's good. That's good to know. I know there seems to be more and more talk about people giving oils in their soft food, perhaps just for the quality of feather, and to allow feathers to allow for perfect feather growth and to stop cysts, etc. To add strength into feathers. Are there any particular oils that you would recommend that have some kind of advantage to the birds in that respect? You can put into soft food, or perhaps mixing with your seeds. just to coat the seed
No,
with?
I wouldn't have anything of that. Again, your feathers are mostly protein based. That's what they are. So when you're going through a rapid molt or rapid growth of feathers, that's partly the reason why you need to have increased protein intake. So if you're concerned about your feather quality coming through, you should be reviewing the protein content of your soft food at that time point, not worrying about with a collection of miscellaneous oils to make them look more sleek.
Fine. So pumpkin oil and stuff like that? No, not needed. Fantastic. Good. I can cross my shopping list then. So just going through the unfortunate, if you've got an ill bird. So with chlamydia and coccidiosis, is there a massive difference between the clinical symptoms with birds suffering from those at all? And what are the treatments for those two illnesses, please?
So
I know it's difficult without some pictures, but could you describe what the symptoms are very briefly as well for people watching as well, please?
So psittacosis is a chlamydia which is commonly carried by budgies, causes respiratory signs, can pass to people. So if you're having flu-like symptoms yourself, then you do need to let your GP know. Birds can lose weight, they can get green droppings, this sort of type thing, due to how the bug works, really. So that is quite something that could be seen. We can see it as individual birds, or you can see it as an outbreak. And birds can carry the chlamydia and be absolutely perfectly fine. Others can carry it and be shedding it and being quite poorly with it as well. So, your sick birds with respiratory signs, nasal discharge, wet bottoms, greeny poo, those are the ones that you would be looking and thinking about. It could be a case of chlamydia. Coccidiosis was the second one that you mentioned. That's not a clinical disease in budgies whatsoever. It's no need to treat. It doesn't exist as an entity in the budgies, and anybody that's telling you that or spouting that on the forums or Facebook groups, they haven't got a clue what they're talking about. It is not a disease particularly. Disease you see in pigeons, which is why a lot of pigeon products have it, but you don't have it in budgies.
You don't want it for stuff. Brilliant. So
now, what a lot of people do, John, is when they're mentioning these things, they mention cocci as the sort of signs, and you'll get a lot of people that are marketing products going, "Oh, this is good for cocci." They're not actually specifying what they mean by cocci, because cocci is coccidiosis, or it's bacteria cocci. They're spelt the same, and I don't think those people actually know the difference of what they're talking about. So if you're talking about a bacterial enteritis due to a bacteria coccus, which we would call a cocci, which is spelt the same as cocci, we just pronounce it differently, then that's a different thing. But coccidiosis is not a problem in budgies, and there's no need to treat it whatsoever. You are wasting your money.
Okay, excellent. So just going back a step to the chlamydia. I know often you'll see budgies with kind of, say, yellow nasal discharge. I always put that down as being chlamydia. I suppose it could, possibly it could be other something else, but that seems to be when we see pictures of that online, that seems to be what people are always suggesting. They'll say, I've got this. This is what the bird looks like, and this is what I'm told it is. I bought this. It's a doxycycline. So I waved it in the air, so you can't see the brand name. That's the product I should be feeding to birds. And I've got it was very expensive for that, so I've just got it in the cupboard in case I need it. That's the product I want to be giving for chlamydia. Is that right, Kevin?
Oh, yes and no, really. If you're thinking you've got chlamydia in your birds, then certainly doxycycline is probably the only product that is suitable for treatment. And there's a number of products out there marketed for pigeons that people use that contain other products like chlortetracycline, things like that just aren't effective. And I wouldn't be using those products. And there are a number of those that are branded and marketed that, again, you'll have people on Facebook and the forum saying, oh, this is, you should use this. And again, no, you're wasting your time, effort and money. Doxycycline is what you need to be using. The trouble that we've got, and I've had fanciers, and I suppose this is the problem that we have, John, is where people go off and self-diagnose and self-treat, is they reach for these products and they get told a random dose by a fancier who, to be honest, doesn't know what they're talking about, and they believe it. Or they use a dose on the side of the packet and they believe that dose and utilize it. And what we have to be aware of is the product you've just shown there is marketed for pigeons, is it not?
Yes, correct.
Okay. 20% doxy in it or 10%?
10%.
It's a 10% one. Okay.
Yeah.
So what that product's going to tell you is how much you give into drinking water for a pigeon. What we do know is the pigeon dose of doxycycline to be effective against chlamydia in pigeons is about a quarter or a fifth of the dose that you need for a budgie. So I know people who have genuinely had chlamydia outbreaks, serious disease. They've gone onto forums, they have listened to fanciers who do not know what they are talking about, who are being irresponsible, telling people to do this, do that, and do the other. And they've gone away and they've been treating with a pigeon dose to absolutely no effect apart from getting bacterial resistance. So for all of these things, you want to make sure you have an adequate resource. You want to make sure you can trust the source you're getting from. And I suppose that's the point why I've got the healthcare pages set up for Dartford Kent BS, is again for that very reason. You want a reliable resource you can get accurate information from. So if you use that at the dose on the package, it isn't going to work. Even if you use it at the dose at 400 milligrams per litre, which is the dose that you'd be looking at for your budgies, the trouble you've got with the doxycycline products out there, you've got 6%, 10%, 12%, 20%. They're all different concentrations. And unless you know what that means, that determines, to be honest, how many measuring cups you're going to add per litre, because the concentration of doxycycline in the product is completely variable. And again, I don't think people appreciate that fully either. So even if you're using the right dose, we know that dose is questionable, if not ineffective as well, despite being the best dose that we got. So there's a whole heap of management around that in terms of what, other water sources you're giving, calcium sources you're giving, how long you're going to give it for, a whole collection of things that you've got to do to try and maximize the effectiveness of that treatment. And if you're just randomly doing these yourself based on what some other random bird fancier told you, because they're obviously an expert, or at least they believe they're an expert, you are doomed to failure.
Because I know, just to give the Dartford BS a little plug, I know they've done a number of talks on and presentations online for them over the course of the last few months, and you've uploaded some of your presentations there. And as you say, they do have the quantities you want to be fit to be prescribing to your birds, don't you? Which is, as you say, is dead helpful. Particularly, I know that the pigeon guys have done a lot of research. They've done more research and invested more money into their products than the budgie guys have. But as you say, we're working with in different strengths, aren't we? And it must be difficult for fanciers, and particularly who haven't got good local vets or any avian vet near them, and which seems to be the case for a lot of people trying to get these answers.
Yes, absolutely, and they're unfortunately looking in the wrong direction to do that. And I suppose that was partly my motivation of wanting to, much as I've done lectures and things over the years for clubs left, right, and centre. When you go to do those presentations, and you go away again, and what you said has long since been forgotten or distorted. But to have a permanent record or a resource which, okay, you can, update with new information and amend and change as things evolve over time, as they do. It's quite an important thing for fanciers to have access to do that. And that's really why the whole thing was taken forward, was that, it's one thing sitting here listening to somebody talk. Okay, the Zoom meetings are a step forward because you can record, but even so, 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, I might say something different. I don't know. I can't predict what I would say in 2 years' time, but it probably is going to change from today. So the beauty of having a resource that's amendable and you can re-upload and change and edit as needed is quite important. And a lot of people they struggle to get that information. But equally, I think the concern that I suppose the problem we have with the fancy as a whole is people will spend a lot of money on an outcross for a budgie. They'll complain about how much a bag of seed costs, and they wouldn't even consider seeking professional help or advice for their birds either, because that's also going to cost money. But a few £100 on outcross, they'd be more than happy to burn their money on that instead of looking at maybe improving the management of their birds.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, I've heard so many stories over the years of, fanciers who you think they're going to be in this for the long term, and they have an outbreak of something, don't know how to deal with it. And you're right, they should be prepared to spend, don't wish to have a disaster, and then we lose them from the hobby. So I think this kind of information, more than anything, is keeping people in the fancy, and which is what we want, isn't it? We need numbers in the fancy, not to be hemorrhaging people.
I think that's it, John, and I think that is one of my concerns. And you get it in any fancy, really, whether it be pigeons, whether it be guinea pigs, or whatever you want to pick on. Everybody who breeds them all of a sudden becomes an expert in the field and starts touting out their information to everybody. And in many cases, it's misinformation or downright incorrect or dangerous. They're just unaware that it is, but they feel they have to impart this information because it makes them look good, instead of getting people to seek the right resources. And so to some extent, I've dealt with a lot of people, I guess more in the last 2 years, where they have been given really quite dangerous or irresponsible advice. They've lost birds as a consequence. They've spent a large amount of money unnecessarily on buying this product, that product, and the other off the internet because they were told to use it. And the consequence is they've lost birds through it. And the more people allow this to continue, the more people will be hemorrhaging from the fancy because of it. We've got to help people get the birds treated right and improve their welfare, get them breeding to retain them.
Absolutely, because there is nothing more disheartening than when, because we all know how hard everyone works with their birds, and there's nothing more disheartening when something really, your birds get ill, and a number, it's always your best ones that die as well, isn't it? They would seem to be determined to be the first ones to fall off the perch. So
well, they're the first ones you worry about or notice, I guess, John. There's lots of people where the best ones die, but they probably could have done something 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years ago sooner to look into it. And in many cases, until the best one goes, people just tend to ignore it and hope it goes away.
And probably. And once a lot of these problems get into the birds, and it's a real wide outbreak. It's too late then, isn't it? I suppose in many cases. So if people, so just go back to chlamydia very quickly. That's bacterial, yes? That's right? Mm-hmm. And does it sit latently in if that's the right word, in the birds, and it will step forth when the birds are stressed, or what kind of brings it on? I mean, is there
moving birds, showing birds, shipping birds, breeding birds can all stress them out, suppress the immune system, and allow chlamydia to come out. So in birds that are on a good nutrition and aren't breeding, or just sitting happily in a well-ventilated, spacious aviary, they're probably not going to be showing much signs of shedding it, but they can hide it and carry it on for years, and it can pop out subsequently when it feels the urge to do so. And again, it won't pop out in every bird. I mean, it's all a question of I guess, individual circumstances, whether people are having a stud-wide problem with it, which you do get, or whether it's just an odd bird here or there and they haven't really paid much attention to that. So, I think we've all had to be aware that it exists, but I wouldn't be routinely treating or anything like that unless I perceived it had reached critical mass, or I had sufficient clinical signs, or even some evidence to back up that this was the infection I was dealing with.
I mean, with fanciers, I mean, the vets will. You recommend people get vets to take stool samples and swabs. Is that the best way forward in many cases? I know people don't always like taking their birds to the vets. Is there? But I suppose you can't really deal with a problem fully and correctly unless you're armed with all the facts, can you? Or your vet is armed with all the facts. You've
got to get an answer in terms of what's going on, in terms of what's happening with the birds. Stool samples and things such as that, yes, they can be useful, but in a lot of cases where these are, again, marketed by, in many cases, sort of pigeon diagnostic laboratories to some extent, they're looking for pigeon pathogens to some extent. And if you're going to send this through the post, you're sending an aged sample through the post and expecting something constructive to come out of that. And I suppose my question is unless your birds have got diarrhea or a digestive problem, what is a stool sample going to show you if they've got a respiratory tract disease then? Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of thing of, you've got to take the right sample that's helpful and useful to you. And a lot of the samples that are sent from the birds, looking at poo samples and this, that, and all the other, they're a waste of your money. They're not giving you the answers that you need for the health status of those birds. And the recommendations coming out from that in many cases are poor, because you've chosen your sample poorly, you've sent it through the post, and you're hoping for something magical to come out the other end that can help you with a diagnosis. And in many cases, that's not the answer either.
So at the end of the day, you're saying fanciers want to get their birds to the vets and let them take bloods or samples.
It's a question of how much you value your individual bird. If you're looking at a stud management point of view, then the economics of, if you like, doing a clinical diagnostic workup on the individual bird with a view to saving it may be cost prohibitive, because you're looking at £300, £400, £500 for those sorts of things, depending what happens. Some of the birds that I'd be dealing with clinically, maybe it's £2,500 by the time they're done. That's quite a lot of money for a budgie, even if it's the best one you've bred. That said, if you're doing routine health screening, which I guess is looking at it from the other side of saying, okay, I want to know what levels of infections I've got in the stud as a whole. I want to work out what impact they've got on my breeding, fertility, viability, mortality rate. Let's have a complete analysis and look and see what diseases are present and which ones are significant. You might have 5 or 6 diseases. To be honest, most people have probably got 9 diseases sitting in their birds right now. Because that's how many endemic diseases we have present. And the people that say my birds are healthy, they're not diseased, are completely lying, because they probably do have all 9. The question is if you've got those 9 present, which one is causing you the worst problem? Because that's the one to target first. If I hit and deal with that one, it's one that I can deal with. That might improve my situation by 20, 30%. There's no point targeting something that's going to change it by 1% when I haven't dealt with the one that's going to change it by 30%. So you need an overview of the disease status of all of the birds and the impact of each disease on your birds, and then target the ones that you can target to try to control or eliminate. And in others where you can't eliminate them, then you're doing damage limitation in terms of how you manage your birds to optimize your product.
It's a tough call, isn't it? Because as you say, it's a lot of money, isn't it? And if we've all got a lot of birds, really, haven't we? It's
how much do you value your entire stud? And then you can say, okay, if that's £2,000, £4,000, £6,000, £10,000, how much of that do you want to spend per year on working out what diseases are present?
That sort of takes me on to a later question in terms of how much do we treat as a preventative? Should we be running a general broad spectrum antibiotic through the stud? Obviously, you can treat for trike with certain products. That would appear to be a cheaper alternative where you're knocking out or you're keeping down certain bugs that the birds naturally carry. Is that recommended? Would you say? Is that a good step?
Okay, so first thing is, would I recommend routine antibiotic use? Absolutely not. And I know a lot of people do. That's irresponsible. It is not to be done. Unless you have a clinical presentation where it justifies it, the answer is no. Option number 2 is, do we have trichomonas as a problem in the birds? Then yes, we do. There's lots of products out there that contain suitable things that will deal, ranitazole being the main one which people will use for them. And again, you've got massive variation in percentages. Normally the market is 6 and 12% products, to be honest. But again, with those, we know that's not completely effective and curative. So that there is a logic in managing that to some extent with repeat dosing, but again, that boils down to what problems each individual stud has. Yeah, I wouldn't be using antibiotics though.
No, okay. But so with the trichomoniasis, again, all the birds carry that, don't they? And it's underlying, it sits there. So if you do treat routinely once or twice a year or 3 times a year, that will it doesn't sorry, you have to treat me like an idiot because I am. But it doesn't.
You're trying to
wipe it out.
lessen the impact of the disease so you lose less birds. Yes, it will.
It will do. Fine. Okay, that's the answer. So in terms of feather cysts on birds, so is it I mean, I'm led to believe it's an inherent thing that the birds will get feather cysts. Do you know why? And some birds are more susceptible than that to others. Is it because the heavier feather is a thicker follicle that can't breach the skin? Do we know why that is?
I mean, it's down to feathering in the end of the day, in terms of the style and nature of feathering that you've got on your birds as to who's more likely to develop a cyst or not. And that may be damage around the follicle, it may be infection set up, it may be the follicle itself is as a consequence of that can't grow normally and will create a cyst. And these are more common on the sort of star feathered birds, and it's down to probability to some extent. And I think there is a lot of people that sort of, I guess, jump on the fact that a cyst is genetic, and if you've got a bird with a cyst, and therefore it's like, oh my God, don't breed with the bird with the cyst, get rid of it. But it's like, all the brothers and sisters have the same feathering, they just weren't unlucky today. And when does a bird develop a cyst? Does it develop a cyst when it's 6 months old, a year old, 18 months, 2 years after you've sold it? It's all down to random chance. It's feather style and design that's leading to them being formed. Depending on the nature of the birds you've got, depends on how likely they're going to get them. So from a genetic point of view, it's the feathers that's causing it, not the cyst, if that makes sense. If you want to stop cysts, don't breed birds with buff feathers.
Fine, okay. But if you get one and squeeze it out, which people a bit yucky if anyone's having their late supper. But yeah, if you squeeze them out, is there any particular product that's reasonably cheap that fanciers can use just to spray, either spray on or apply, just to ease the suffering of the bird and stop?
So I guess we have to be very cautious about people doing these things at home because it depends on their experience. Equally, the birds will be in pain and discomfort with these, and to physically squeeze something like that will be causing quite marked pain and discomfort. So for those sort of birds, then you would be wanting to give them some pain medication. I think that would make sense. An anti-inflammatory will ease the inflammation around that follicle site. Applying things into the follicle site is probably going to cause more upset and damage than otherwise. We tend to avoid topical treatments in the birds for that reason. There are some specific products out there marketed for encouraging healing in these sorts of wounds. And I suppose the only one I would be recommending for the birds would be what we call the hydrogels, which is a type of product that you can get it online quite happily. If you put in hydrogel, you'll pick it up. You can get them. They're not prescription only, but these encourage wound healing without a sort of having the side effects you'd have from squirting disinfectant or putting powder up or something silly. So I think for me, if you did want to do something in there, then it would be, a hydrogel I would be using. But you want systemic pain relief. You probably want some antibiotics because you've got an open big hole in the bottom of that bird now. And those I'd probably be giving orally, to be honest, by direct crop tube. But I'm not a fan of treatment in water. Okay, treatment in water if you're giving something prophylactic maybe and you're doing some damage limitation, but if you've got actually a clinical case that's showing signs of disease, then in water medication it's pointless. You want to be crop tubing that dose directly to ensure the bird got it. But it also gives you the opportunity for additional fluid support and nutritional support to help that bird through the crisis.
Sure. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. The product Baytril, that seems to be one that everyone says, oh, in the old days I got Baytril and I used Baytril. What can you? I know you can still get Baytril prescribed. What is that used for? I know it's supposed you need again, there's different strengths. I think 2.5% was the one that seemed to be the one that everyone used to recommend. What is Baytril kind of this wonder drug? What does it treat? What's the...
Okay, so
first off, that's the broad question.
No, that's fine. Well, I mean, basically, you're down to then. I guess we're talking antibiotics in birds, and these, okay, certainly in the UK at least, then these are prescription only. Now there are lots of pigeon sites internationally online that you can buy these sort of products or import them, which obviously is not ideal, because again you're just randomly throwing drugs at your birds with no idea, and it's out with the control of the UK, I guess, to stop those companies from selling them. So enrofloxacin is the antibiotic in that product. There's a lot of other brand names as well. It's quite a high tier antibiotic, actually. It's one that we probably shouldn't be using as a routine basis, because of it's one of these when we're concerned about antibiotic resistance. Using a product like this is something that we probably shouldn't be. It's quite wide spectrum. It does quite well against resistance, but arguably, we're using too much of it. So that is one that will deal with bacterial infections in birds. It is quite widely used, both by vets and by, you can buy it over the internet as well. But again, it's one that I'll be looking at. If I was feeling the need to use it, I would be direct dosing an individual bird with it. This is not something I'd be randomly chucking in the water as a preventative or anything like that. This would be to treat a bird specifically. But there are other antibiotics that you could probably use. If we're talking feather cysts, for example, you don't need something like enrofloxacin for that. A straight penicillin would probably be perfectly adequate for your purposes.
Okay, and so just moving on to my next question in this first little set with psittacosis. So we've done chlamydia, we've done cocci, but we haven't done psittacosis yet. I don't think.
Psittacosis and chlamydia are the same things, John.
They are the same. Fine. Okay. Brilliant. Okay, that's clear that up. So yeah, just go. Right. Thanks for that. With as breeders, I was always told it's good to have medicines in your cabinet rather so you can react quicker than you can if you didn't. What kind of medicine should we have in our small fridge or our medicine cabinet for our birds, would you recommend?
Okay, so in terms of, I guess, preventative medicine, let's put it that way, on things that you would be considering using as a routine, then yes, something for trichomonas, absolutely relevant to have as an in-water, stud treatment. That's sensible. There is a logic in having something like metronidazole for direct dosing of sick birds with trichomonas as well, which is very effective, but again, that's prescription only. Secondary to that, then you've got to think about things like scaly face and red mite. That's something you don't want to be entering into your stud. So ivermectin is the way forward there to control that. That's something you should be routinely using on new birds entering your stud. But I'd also be considering using that for birds coming back from a show, for example, just to be on the precautionary side. And I guess if you're stopping those sorts of parasites coming in at the door, then there is less of a need for routine treatment. Some people use ivermectin all the time, and I think that's excessive. I think if you're stopping it coming in the door, then you'll need to be treating on a regular basis. It's much less. Number 3 on your list then for routine treatments, you may want to consider what to do for avian gastric yeast. And I think, to be honest, with the availability of products we've got at the minute, sodium benzoate's okay. Amphotericin B is getting harder to get hold of. And certainly in water, amphotericin B, it's not really effective. If you want to really have a decent go at treating avian gastric yeast, you need to be crop tubing them with the amphotericin twice a day. So that's certainly on your list.
That was for Megabac, was it? The amphotericin B?
Yeah, avian gastric yeast, Macrorhabdus, Megabacteria, whichever you want to call it, they're all the same thing. Yes, but again, it boils down to how much of a problem is that causing your birds, and again, that comes back to what post-mortem work have you done to find out? Because you might be spending, for a reasonable size stud, you're probably going to get through, well, if you're crop tubing, probably £250 worth of amphotericin for treatment. If you're putting it in water, you might get away with just one bottle, but you're spending £120 for in water treatment that probably doesn't work that effectively because of the way you're administering it for a problem you don't know how much severity your problem is. Beyond that, then I suppose if you are thinking you've got birds with enteritis, do I need to have something on standby for that? And then you're down to thinking, do I want a penicillin? Do I want to go for enrofloxacin, much as the higher end antibiotic? Do you need to have doxycycline on standby? Probably not. But if you have, okay, very well and good. And then some pain medication, some meloxicam will be lovely for your birds, for those chicks that are attacked by the hens, things like that. I certainly would add into that cabinet, I would add in a liquid calcium and D3 supplement that you can direct dose a hen with. So if you've got a hen that's coming through egg bound, or the eggshells are suddenly started getting soft, there is a logic there in going, okay, well, I know that you've reached that tipping point despite my efforts at keeping your calcium metabolism under control. It's reached a tipping point that you need individual help now, and having a calcium D3 liquid supplement that you can then either crop tube with, put it into a beak, or just put it into the water for her cage. You know, there may be something in logic in having that present to help those individual birds that need it, where your dietary modification with the best in the world, because birds are selective feeders, you know, that hen maybe just didn't want to eat the soft feed that week because she was a hen you'd bought in that wasn't used to eating it, for example. So there is a logic in having a calcium or D3 supplement in there as well, target for those sick hens as well. Decent hand rearing food, of course, essential for topping up babies as you need to, but also for helping improve the condition of birds that are sick. And a lot of the medications we've got, enrofloxacin being one, metronidazole being another, they taste awful. Your bird will do its very best to vomit those up as well. And some of those are quite either alkaline or acidic as well. So mixing those in a hand rearing food and giving some more dilution to that product will actually make them a bit more palatable and stop any risk of, you know, inflammation from giving a concentrated drug.
Excellent, excellent. I know you recommended me the metronidazole some time ago, and that made a big thank you to you again for that, because that made a huge difference to me when I had a few sick birds. So I know I've always got that in the cupboard. I mean, that one is in my small fridge. I should rather. I mean, that one isn't too expensive. But again, so a lot of them have only got a particular life, haven't they? Once you've opened them as well. So I suppose it's, again, you've got to look at whether you want to have these things sort of going out of date, chucking them away, and then going back and getting another bottle every 3 or 4 months. But then I suppose get it from how much your stud's worth.
From a prescription point of view, and this goes back to general prescription for pharmaceuticals, you've got a month pretty much once you breach a container. This is why when you're going to see your GP and they're medicating you, you have a packet with 28 days worth, because you have a packet with 28 days worth. You don't get more than a month's supply on prescription at any one go. So when we're using liquid supplements or whatever, then again, depends on the product, because some of those have to be fridge and only viable for 5-7 days. Then you have to discard the entire lot. Others that come in liquid format when you start off with, then legally you've got 28 days before you then throw that out. Now, I suspect if you were talking practically, I'm fairly sure there are people that are using medications on themselves that they've had the bottle of Gaviscon open for more than 28 days and they decided to continue to use it, or that, Piriton liquid that they had for the kids, they're probably using that beyond the 28 days. And I think fanciers do that, realistically, yes. And I suppose providing the bottle's uncontaminated and it's within its use-by date, maybe people will do that. But legally, technically, it's you breach that bottle, 28 days, you need a new bottle.
Okay. Well, I better put something my way. I've been in there a while. So with going light in budgets, there's no sort of magic. There's probably going to be a lot of reasons that birds go light, I assume. What's the most common one that you, or common one or two, would you say, for birds going light? Is there because this is going to come to a question, I think, where is there much you can do about going light?
Okay, so my first question, I suppose, is when are the birds going light? What is their age group? Because that makes a big difference. The two main causes we've got for body condition loss in the birds, I guess acute loss will actually be trike, to be honest. You'll get that with trichomonas. They'll go sick and lose weight quite quickly with that. If you're looking at chronic disease and chronic weight loss, then your avian gastric yeast, Macrorhabdus, megabac is one, which would be birds from sort of 8 months of age onwards. The other one, which I guess would be avian tuberculosis, which we'd be seeing from 18 months of age onwards for the older birds. And a lot of those will be quite chronically thin as well. Although normally they would have quite an obvious enteritis, a messy bottom as well, associated with that body condition loss. This is an enteric infection, basically.
Okay, we've just jumping in on avian TB. I never heard of it until a couple of years ago. But I'm getting the impression that that's becoming a bigger problem in the fancy. What is it a huge problem in the fancy? Would you say, or that kind of it doesn't get a whole lot of press and discussion at the moment? But some people said to me that's the one that perhaps is getting it's becoming more widespread.
My impression with avian TB in the budgies is that it's already endemic, that everybody already has it. We've long since missed the boat for stopping its transmission throughout the entire fancy, and it's being exported widely by people from the UK as well. And I'm sure it's present internationally now, from wherever. So it is widespread. Tuberculosis is a chronic disease. So juveniles don't show any clinical signs, and if you were to run diagnostic testing on the juveniles, you'd probably miss it, and we didn't really have a decent test anyway. But you're going to start seeing signs, certainly in birds from 18 months of age onwards, maybe from then on. And a lot of people now, because they're changing the age of the birds around quite quickly, they're shipping out these older birds long before signs of TB is seen in those individuals. And because it's so chronic in its nature, you can buy a bird in and it can go, oh, that bird seems okay. And you might not see signs developing for 6 or 9 or a year, 9 months later or a year later after purchase. You can't really quarantine for it. It boils down to, again, is it present in my birds? Have I tested the right birds to see if it's there? And then if it is, you're down to changing your management practices. And certainly, I would say in the last 2 years, out of all of the studies I've looked at, where I've had the chance to look at the right birds, if that makes sense, with the right signs going through and said, oh, can I look at that one, please? I found tuberculosis. And certainly I got a list of probably, I don't know, up to a dozen very prominent names within the fancy in the UK that I know are positive. And the fact of the matter is if one individual of that nature who is breeding 400 birds a year, let's suggest for an example, and then 200 of those birds go off to 50 fanciers every year, it's very easy for these things to be spread around quite rapidly. And we've long since missed that boat. TB is endemic. Everybody's got it. It's the older birds that are affected. In many cases, you don't have those birds around. They're long since dead and buried or moved on before they would have shown signs of clinical disease. And if you do get an old bird in retirement that goes thin, well, it's an old bird in retirement. So, it's going to go thin, isn't it? Because it's dying of old age. So this is a problem, and it's a problem that is limiting the lifespan of our birds and their reproductive viability down to probably 2 years. So, your cock birds now, for example, that would be, even late 18s, you'll start getting birds showing signs of TB at that point. And the 17s and 16s, they're probably, gone thin and they've had it really. So that's the one that we've got now. And this wasn't present 10 years ago. This is something we've introduced, and the fancy has just not dealt with it because standard thing, isn't it? Let's just chuck something in the water and hope and never get a diagnosis. And so TB is added to our list now of endemic diseases that we've got in the fancy as a whole and probably worldwide now.
And Okay, but it's not good to know, but at the same time, it's good to have a better understanding of it. With so the symptoms are, as you say, having messy bottoms, lots of weight loss. Is there the bird suffering with breathing difficulties? No.
No. So avian TB affects birds differently to how mammalian TB works in people. So in people, tuberculosis is mammalian TB. That is a respiratory infection primarily in people. That's where we take the time there. In the birds, this is primarily enteric, so it forms abscesses in the bowels. It can spread around the body into liver and things as well. But the main thing is bowel damage, where they can't absorb things and they shed it in their poo basically, and it's poo that they transmit it around to everybody else in the shed as well. And it is also potentially transmittable to people as well. And obviously, tuberculosis in people is a major deal. And that's something we do have to be aware of. But there's no real treatment per se that we can offer for TB. It's how you manage your birds effectively to reduce its impact. But to some extent, you've got to know if you've got it and the severity that you've got it already. And with the rate at which birds swap and exchange between fanciers, as I said, one person's got it that's got a nice set of birds, and they can easily spread it to 50 or 100 people in 1 year without even realizing it. And before you know it, it's gone all over the place. And like I say, I screen all birds that come into my shed. I screen them all, wherever they're from. So that's obviously something that I do, and I guess you find out stuff when you do that.
But for a normal fan, just a run-of-the-mill fancier like myself, a lay fancier, there's not much I can do, is there? I've just got to, the bird's not. If he doesn't look ill, it's what. How can I screen it? It's just I can't. Can I? It's just
no. But you're talking screening. You're talking screening your birds, so you know what diseases are present in your birds, and then you're talking sourcing birds from somebody else who screened their birds, so you know what diseases they've got. So it boils down again to trust, doesn't it? If you're buying birds from 3 or 4 fanciers, and you know the disease status of their studs because they looked and bothered to look, and you know the disease profile that they've got matches the disease profile in your birds, there's no point panicking about you buying a bird in that might be carrying TB if you've no idea if you've already got it. Because what's the point? You've already got it. It's not making your situation worse. If you don't have it, then absolutely you don't want it. But what I'm saying is you've probably missed the boat and you've already got it. So there is an element here of, before you start pointing the finger at other people, which people in the fancy love to do, everybody else is at fault, aren't they? Of course, I bought a sick bird, it's all your fault.
Of course they are.
Find out what you've got going on with your birds and what diseases you have. And then if you're looking at getting sources in, you want those sources to, being honest, have the same diseases you have. Because then it really doesn't matter, because you've both got the same range of endemic diseases. You have both hopefully going to manage them and control them and try to eliminate the ones that you can. What you don't want to do is to introduce a novel disease. And equally, put it on the other side. If you're that fancy who says, I bought this bird and it had that, isn't it so awful? Well, you sell birds too. Do you know what diseases your birds are carrying? What birds are you spreading to somebody else? You don't know. So you're just as bad, aren't you?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And the problem with fanciers, as we've all found, is that when people have a problem, they tend not to want to tell anyone about it. So I always applaud
because we point the finger at them and shout at them and mean again.
Absolutely, you get there are people they want to throw tomatoes at you at the club show and stuff, rotten fruit at you at the club show.
Yes,
I do always take my hat off to fanciers who will go out, put their hand up and say, "This is what I've had. Now learn from it." So, and unfortunately, they're few and far between, which is a shame.
And to some extent, that's a double-edged sword, because they tend to do that. At which point, everybody says, "Oh, what did you use and where did you get it from?" At which point, everyone then just copies what they did, versus finding out what's wrong with the birds in the first place and tailoring or bespoking an individual program for the health status of their birds. So I think that if you're talking about how do you improve the health of budgies generally, I suppose there's a couple of things we've got to think about here. One is you need to be thinking about quarantine for a reasonable time period before they come into your birds. And you need to be aware of what infections you've got and how best to manage them. And the people you're buying from need to be in that exact same situation. And until we get to that point that people are prepared to put a bit of effort into that, all of these endemic diseases we've got, nobody knows they've got them, and they're just spreading them around willy-nilly. And certainly if you look at things like TB, and you're looking at, let's suggest you're going to buy an outcross, and you want to buy an outcross of best you could get, you could afford. You know, you go back decades. You know, the one thing you do when you go to see a top fancy is that you might get a couple of babies that are sort of all right, and they might have a bird that you know that you really like that's out of your budget. But I go, well, actually, I've got one I've been using for 3 years. It's been sitting in the flight. You can have that one on the cheap, or I'll just give it to you. You can take it home and give it a whirl. And that very aged bird is the very aged bird that's probably shedding lots of TB that you've now just infected around your shed. Because obviously, that, you know, the older you are, the greater risk you've got of shedding, the greater risk you've got of open disease in your carcass, if that makes sense. Well, not in your carcass, in your living bird before you become a carcass. But you know, those are the ones that are going to be shedding more. So the older birds are a greater risk category here. And maybe that's something we need to be taking a message of, that I don't want to be retiring old birds. I don't want to have an old bird as a gift and give it a bash. If I want to try and manage and reduce severity of disease here, those birds don't want to be around.
Okay. And so with the TB, it's transmitted via the droppings. Is it? Can it be? It's not it's not airborne. What about if the droppings have become dust? Does it become an aerosol then, or?
It can do, but basically ingestion of feces is how the main route of transmission is in the birds. So it comes down to sort of, you know, hygiene as well to some extent, but it's oral ingestion is the main route for the birds for TB transmission.
Fine. Okay. And so is that makes it bacterial then?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. Brilliant.
But a deeply unpleasant resistant bacteria that antibiotics can't really treat effectively, and I wouldn't encourage you to go down that route at all.
Just don't go down that route. Okay. We jumped all over the place with some of my questions. My favourite one is, so moving on to French molt, because I can't not ask you about that. People say there's stress molt. Stress molt is just French molt. Is that correct?
Yes. They're just making up a story.
Right. Okay. So French molt is polyomavirus.
There's two viruses that we need to be concerned about. One of them is polyomavirus. The other is citizen beak and feather disease virus. These are two more infections that are endemic within the fancy. How much problem they cause you is quite variable. I think, and again, this is just anecdote, my personal hunch, but I suspect that polyomavirus is far more of a concern than beak and feather disease virus in budgies in terms of causing clinical disease. And it's polyomavirus we should be probably focusing on in terms of control during the breeding season more than PBFD would be my thought process.
Okay, so with French, so there's fledgling disease. I always thought that was something separate, but more recently I'm given to understand that fledgling disease is just French molt, but perhaps a more what's the phrase? It's just a stronger strain of it that takes the birds earlier.
So your polyomavirus is going to affect birds at different stages of the nest. Okay, you're going to see it affecting, occasionally you'll see it having an impact on dead in shell or hatchability, but that's maybe less of a feature of polyomavirus. Your main issue is going to be nestlings from sort of day 5 to a fortnight, where you're going to start seeing signs of mortality in those. So you'll get a sort of a phase at that point. And then you'll see it causing in later babies, you'll start seeing signs right the way through to fledging, to be honest, and beyond, where you're going to start seeing feather dystrophy or damaged feather production. And either that is they can't produce them in the first place, or they produce them, but then they tend to molt them out. And that really, it's all the same disease process. It's just a question of what age was I exposed, what is my immune system like, and what's clinical signs am I going to get? And all of these things, they're all the same. Stress molt doesn't exist. People making it up, it's polyoma virus. They're just trying to pretend nothing's wrong.
Okay, so if I know with French molt, if you have, so I'm trying to break this down, so it's perhaps it's simple for fanciers who haven't really been too affected by it in the past. If you get it, I've always found that you stop for 4 months. Obviously, you clean everything down. You should have high gene levels anyway, but I always have a good clean down, rest the birds, and then go again. And that seems to fix the problem until, if it's going to rear its head again, it will do at the back end of the breeding season. So
yeah, again,
is this something else that's always present in the birds, but comes forth when their systems are under pressure during breeding?
Yes. So I mean, it's always present. And one of the main sort of thought processes with the polyoma transmission is that it's more young hens than older hens are believed to be the culprits, where they have increased risk of shedding it in the nest box. So this isn't transmitted through the egg, although it can be. Normally, the hen is rearing the chicks. She's having a bit of a to-do. It's the first time she's done it. She's under a bit of pressure. She starts shedding it at that point, and that's when you see it. And think of things when you're going through the breeding season, when you've got more hens with chicks going through that process. Your hand hygiene between nest boxes possibly limited, fostering chicks left, right, and centre to try and save them, and you're ringing them here and there. You're transmitting it on your fingers from nest box to nest box, so you're going to make the situation worse. Couple that with having a busy breeding season, less attention to hygiene, increased stocking density. A lot of birds, if they're not on their first round, might be on their third or fourth, and they're starting to get tired now and worn down. You put all of those factors together, and that's going to increase your risk factor for that hen shedding polyoma and making the situation worse. So stopping, letting them recharge, get their nutrition sorted out, having a good clean down, reducing virus load in the environment, and then repairing tends to work. But there is nothing magical you can put in the water that's going to help you with this, short of sorting out the management of your birds and giving your birds the rest and ensuring that your hygiene and stocking density is kept under control, and nutrition to some extent.
I know it seems to, when I've had it over the years, it will stop in one cage and then progress into others around. And some years you'll get 1 or 2 cages with it. Other years it goes from one end of the bird to the other very quickly. And at that point you think, crikey, this is... So there seems to be several strains of it. Or is it just the fact that perhaps it's my management that hasn't been great that has resulted in other birds catching it so quickly? Could that be the reason rather than my theory?
It could be. I mean, certainly, I think I would encourage anybody who is breeding birds is we do like to poke around in the nest, don't we? Unless the hen's going to try and kill us. And I personally wouldn't do that. Okay, yes, you want to make sure that they're alive and viable, but we do know if they're going to start showing signs of polyoma, it's going to start kicking in 5 days to a week. You know, you're going to start seeing signs of this before you ring them. And, you know, again, John, a very familiar thing is you ring a bunch of chicks and the polyoma kicks in and the little rings start falling off their eggs again and the birds have had it 3 or 4 days afterwards. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no need to be touching anything in that nest box until you get to ringing stage. You don't need to be poking and handling the chicks. You can see from a distance if they're a sensible colour and they've been fed. And again, do you want to cross-foster at that stage? No. If I want to cross-foster, I'm going to foster a fertile egg that's clear before I've done that because the risk of transmission is less. So I think if you're looking at what point do I start handling and messing about with my chicks cross-fostering, don't touch them. Wait until you've got to ring them. Have some, you know, we're unfortunately all happy with disinfectant wipes and hand gel and all this sort of type thing this day and age. That's become part of our routine language that we're using. Then fine, ring your chick, wash your hands, disinfect, wipe them, move on to the next nest. But try to avoid cross-transmission between 2 nests, because if one nest goes down, to some extent, you need to bury and nurse that nest. And I think a lot of people, when in a circumstance that one nest starts to struggle, they're desperately cross-fostering those chicks out to try and save them, and I get that. I absolutely get that. But if you're risking going from one infected nest box to having 4, hasn't kind of helped.
No, absolutely. And with yeah, okay. So is there any merit in perhaps if you've had it, because you talk to breeders who say, I've had French molt, we had it for several years, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but since that time we haven't had it. So obviously those people, from what you're suggesting, have worked out their management, perhaps been careful when they bring new birds in, they let them fly with their existing ones before they pair them up, because there does seem to be some susceptibility to new birds that come in, particularly if you bring them in mid-breeding season. I've had that personally, where either they get the new birds you bring in that you pair up get French molt, or everything around them gets it. But if you've had French molt in the last couple of years, in consecutive seasons, is it worth perhaps not permitting any pairs to have rear more than 2 rounds? So let them have their 2 rounds. If you've got, of course, like me, you've got hundreds of quality budgies sitting around in the flight. But if you're in that position, is it worth 2 rounds, and then before the birds really get under stress, they get kicked out, nest box goes into disinfectant, cage cleaned out, next pair in? Would that be a good tactic for people who have suffered with it continually, perhaps?
I suppose it is one of the things to consider with obviously, being able to clean the cages out completely in between time. And I think this again goes down to how you set your bird shed up. Mine are in wire cages for purposes of UV light. I can take out a wire cage, and I've got a tank I can disinfect and dunk it in. So all of my everything in my bird room is removable and submersible in disinfectant if I wanted to. If I've got a set of wooden stock cages, that's quite hard to do that. So it boils down to cage design as well, and how easy you can clean things. And that's something you do need to have relevant to put that new pair into what is a clean cage versus a cage you just scrape the bottom out a bit and then chuck them back in again. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is a logic in doing that, and I suppose there's 2 or 3 sides to that coin, and this is a subject for a future Dartford meeting actually. But you're coming down to some extent genetic management of a group of birds as well. Now, I know, for example, if you've got a pair that are down and they're fit and they're producing good chicks that you like. Now, if we take, how many cages do you breed with, John?
About 23, 24.
Okay, 24 cages, right, okay. So let's suggest, right, you went and bought an outstanding anthracite from a well-known, breeder, okay, and you want to breed anthracites, and you pair that up to your best cobalt, okay, and that bird bred you over 4 rounds, bred you, I don't know, let's suggest 16 chicks. You're oh my God, I bred 16 anthracites. I'm so impressed with that bird. That's now the grandchildren from that bird will be in 3/4 of your pairs next year. So, when you're looking at some of these birds that are very productive, and people say, oh, this is a very influential bird in my stud, what you've actually got in a very short space of time is a stud that's pretty much all descended from that one individual, maybe 3 or 4 generations. Your risk of inbreeding long term is quite high, but your risk also, plus or minus, is the stud starts to look very, very similar. And if you look at a lot of the top fancies out there, you can recognize a bird from feet away whose bird that is, just because that style of bird is stamped on their bird. But it's very difficult to change that style, improve that style, add something different in, because they've just become progressively inbred over generations. And if you bred 20 anthracites from this bird, that suggests that you've got, how many do you want to keep? How many would you keep? 6, 8? So you bred 10, you just... Okay, but you're either going to have the situation that one bird predominates your entire stud now, and everybody else hasn't had a look in because this bird's so amazing, and your stud is now just all descendants from that one bird. Or if you bred 20, you've sold 2 of them anyway. So to some extent, there is a logic in saying, if I've got enough back from that bird, do I need any more? And if you said to me, okay, I've got a bird, and I've said this at other meetings before, let's suggest you've gone out and you bought that amazing outcross, not mid-season, because you don't want it to spread polyoma, you've done it out of season, you've paired it up, and you're thinking, if I pair it to that best hen that I got, that really nice looking hen, I bet I'm going to get a round of clear eggs, and I'm going to get very cross because I've just burnt my cash. Okay. So you're probably going to pair it to an average hen, aren't you? Because you want something from that bird. The question is how much do I get from that bird before I stop it with that average hen? So if you're looking at passing on the genetic features of that bird to the offspring, 4 chicks or 7 chicks will give you the entire genome of that bird in the next generation. So if I paired up a cock bird and I bred 8 chicks over 2 rounds, that cock bird's entire DNA is in those 8 chicks. If that bird died tomorrow, its DNA is in those 8 chicks. Because every chick is inheriting half of its DNA. So the first one was half, 2 chicks, that's 75, 3 chicks is 82 and a half, and so on and so forth based on probability. So by the time you get to 7 or 8 chicks, you've got all of its DNA saved. So if I paired that to a decent hen down and didn't breed anything or bred 1, it's okay because I've got 8 chicks. I've got all of the genetic potential from that bird saved. So to some extent, if you work on that as a way of looking at it, 2 rounds from a bird, 4 chicks, 6 chicks, 8 chicks, I've got enough for the next generation. Okay, I might like more, and then I can maybe select just the very best. But as a minimum sort of target, that's okay, and that's achievable over 2 rounds. So there might be a logic in saying, let's do that. Equally, there might be logic in saying, I've got those chicks from that bird over 2 rounds. It's the hens that are going to be putting under stress with laying eggs and rearing chicks. Why don't I foster that cock? Why don't I give that cock to a different hen now? Let's get some other babies from another hen with it now, a different style hen, a better hen, because I've got my investment returned in the babies, but that hen can rest. Let's get another hen in there that hasn't been through that pressure, and she can take on a turn. And it's the hens to some extent that we're all concerned about with the rearing stresses on them in the earlier stages and shedding it in the nest box to the babies. So yes, absolutely, you're right, but I'd be more concerned about switching the hens around than the cock birds for a variety of reasons.
Fine. Okay, that's good. Okay, well, as I say, I'll fess up and say I always get a little bit of French molt at the end of the year. So perhaps that's what I need to do with some of my latter pairs, just to get. Because I must say, I would like a year where I don't get any. I think that would be a bit of an achievement. And I mean,
a lot of people are probably getting signs of polyoma in the earlier stages where the chicks are dying in the nest, and because they're not feathered up, they're not classing it as French molt, and they're pretending they don't have it.
Well, this was another question that one of the members on the forum wanted me to put to you, was that if you've got chicks that you're losing a few days old, and I mean there could be a whole myriad reasons why that's happening, but as you say, I assume from what you've just said that there's every chance that could be polyoma virus, but you just don't realise.
Yes.
Okay.
And I guess it's a question of the circumstances around the death of those chicks and what they look like. I mean, if you've got a hen that's not feeding and the chicks are clearly just empty crops and that's them gone, and they've gone fairly quickly with that, versus chicks that are becoming abnormally coloured or that are dying with a full crop, and if you're getting an anemia, polyomavirus-induced anemia, I mean, they can go from being healthy in the morning to being white as a sheet and dead with a full crop within 6 hours if they get a peracute form. So I think a lot of people were there getting chick mortality in that circumstance. They're blaming the hen, they're blaming the diet. The hen was just, it was bonfire night. There's a few fireworks around. That's why it all happened. Versus actually knowing they've got a problem because they're dying at that stage and not coming through with all the feather abnormalities you see with the elder chicks. They're going, I've got polyomavirus this year. Just effectively fixed at a different stage.
So when people are getting, because we always lose chicks a day old, and if you're at work, you often, by the time you get home, they've been well and truly flattened. You can't often see where they've been fed.
We're talking chicks more like 5 days to a week age. Bear in mind, this is transmission from the mother that's stressed during rearing to the chicks. So this isn't coming down vertically. So these day olds that pick off and die, okay, you might have issues with infection coming through the eggs or something. That's a whole different, again, another discussion. But those probably aren't polyoma. That's other things going on. We're talking birds in more like 5 days, 10 days, that sort of age group.
But yeah, when because often you'll get, and I've had it in spells in the past where and then it kind of goes away. Where maybe 1 or 2 boxes, I've had birds that, as you say, they're very well in the morning, and then they either go very pale or they go very red.
Yep.
and that could well be polyomavirus, you think? At
yes.
That point.
So because
they're well fed.
Yep. So because we're concerned this is transmission from the hen in the nest box to the chicks, if you're getting that and you're thinking this hen isn't coping with the scenario, there's nothing to stop you from fostering the eggs as they are laid from that hen to somebody else, maybe a more mature hen who knows what she's at, who's a good foster mother, to get something from that hen without the risk of her shedding and transmitting polyoma around and killing all the chicks off. But you want to move them before they've had the risk of exposure.
Okay. But are they not, if they're in a nest box with other eggs, isn't that instant exposure though? Bless you. Is that not instant exposure?
No, because you're moving the eggs.
But if it's in the nest box, presumably is it not on the shell, and you can't clean the egg, can you wash the egg? Is that?
You could wash them, and that's certainly a possibility. But what you're talking about really, if you're having this as an issue, the babies have either gone, or they've fledged. You can then clean your nest box out completely and restart and get the eggs as they're freshly laid and move across. So your risk there is much less.
Okay. And you say that the polyomavirus can go. It could be inside the egg. The mother can transmit it into the egg. But that's rare? Is it, or?
It's less likely with polyoma versus PPF. Yes. So this really is a stressed young hen that's transmitting it across to the PPF.
Okay. And with it's a whole different talk. I've heard people say that with their eggs sometimes, with their dead in shells, they've had E. coli in the eggs. Is that quite common, or?
How do they know they've got E. coli in the eggs?
I assume they've had them tested some way or form.
Okay, so in terms of a lot of the companies that are or doing egg testing, you're sending your adult egg, or your adult egg probably, which has got a decomposing carcass in it, through the post. That's at room temperature for 2 days. That then hits their lab, and then they culture a very common bacteria that overgrows on culture quite happily. So I wouldn't be necessarily trusting a culture result on a decomposing carcass for 3 days at room temperature, would you?
Probably not.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a bit rank by then.
Okay, so the point made there is that's pointless. They don't know they've got E. coli. They found E. coli as a post-mortem invader on a dead carcass for 3 days. Whoop-de-doo-dah. Doesn't mean anything. So if you want to work out why you're getting adult or dead in shell, and you're thinking there's a bacterial component, and certainly I've done this with fanciers, then you need to be culturing eggs that aren't dead yet. You need embryonated eggs to run a culture from a sample that's taken sterile, that's cultured immediately. You probably should be looking at culturing ovaries or oviducts of your hens to see what's going on in there as well. So these people that have E. coli that they've identified on these decaying chicks or embryos that have been sent through the post, no, absolutely pointless, waste of time, misinformation, and of no use to anybody whatsoever, and again leading to abuse of antibiotics. They don't have a diagnosis, they've taken the wrong samples, but because they haven't spoken to get proper advice about it, they've just shipped them off to a company whose commercial interest is in making money. That's what they've ended up with, and sadly, we do have to be honest that these companies have successfully touted their wares to societies and said, "Oh, send us some samples, we give you a discount." You go, "Oh, this is amazing," and before you know it, you've accidentally endorsed a practice that is of no use whatsoever.
Okay, so well that again. That's interesting to know.
You have to trust the sample you're taking.
Yeah, and again, as you say, when it goes through the post, unless you can deliver, unless this laboratory is next door to you, you've got to, and you can just walk it there quickly. You've got to, it's just the results are going to skew, aren't
Yeah, and a small chick kept at room temperature, or you very eloquently said it already, John. To be honest, a chick that's died in the nest box, or has been out at work during the day, you come back and it's blackened. That bird has decomposed so rapidly by an incubated hen at 32 degrees, whatever. It's gone. The usefulness of that body for autopsy, for culture, for anything is pointless. You need a fresh culture before the egg is addled to get an answer from that, or you need a culture from a clear egg to do that and say, okay, what bacteria are present in these? And you need to take that in a sterile fashion. That's not something a fancy is going to do. And you need to plate that immediately and say, is there bacteria in this egg? And have a result that you can say, yeah, I believe that, because it should be sterile.
Okay. With dead in shell, because that's just a huge problem for fanciers. And it's funny, in a given year you'll have people saying, I've had a good first round, then I've had a ton of dead in shells. I mean, I often wonder whether it's atmospheric. I mean, there's just going to be a whole heap of reasons why people get dead in shell. Where it's not humidity, and it's if nothing's changed, I mean, yeah, if in a world where nothing's changed in your bird room, what would be the most common factors for dead in shell, would you say? And is there anything that the breeders can do to try and minimise dead in shell? I mean, if that was the case?
I suppose, to be fair, the causes of dead in shell can be quite varied, and PBFD and polyoma are two on your list, versus also vertical transmission with bacteria as well as bacterial transmission into the egg from the nest. Eggs aren't laid dirty, but you'll have plenty of hens that will poo on them in the nest box and things, and you'll handle them with your fingers as well, which may be less than perfect, in terms of hygiene too. So there's lots of causes there, and what you need to decide is this a vertically transmitted problem from the hen that I can actually action, or is this a nest box hygiene issue that I've got going on here, where I've got to look at my, in terms of, substrate I'm using in that nest box, how much I'm handling the eggs. Is it down to humidity at the nest box level? The humidity of your shed is irrelevant to some extent. It's what is a humidity inside that nest box with that hen. What's the ventilation for that nest box? And I get that extremes in weather will impact the relative humidity in the shed, but the hen's going to regulate that in the nest box to some extent, and that's where it matters.
And I suppose it depends on how that hen's sitting as well, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Is she a good mother in that regard? Is she turning her eggs every day? Or kicking them around? I suppose these are all extra factors.
Yes, and this is where, when you're looking at the poultry industry in terms of hatchability, getting artificial incubation set up in the right environment, right humidity, turning, and ensuring the eggs are clean when they go in, and I guess moving them across just before they're due to hatch, because a hatching chick is a source of infection as well for all the other unhatched eggs. You'll know yourself as the nest progresses through, the chances of the later chicks hatching is getting less and less and less, and you get amazing, oh my god, the last chick's come out, I didn't expect that, because the eggs become so heavily contaminated that you just weren't expecting it to hatch. So artificial incubation is a way to avoid a lot of those problems, with the eggs being dropped back in just at the time point for hatching. But there probably is a logic in capping the number of eggs each hen is going to sit on, and moving those latter eggs away, so that, because they're going to get contaminated with the poo from the first bunch of chicks. So if you want to optimize your chance of success from that, then artificial incubation is the way forward to do that. And that's just, again, managing the number of chicks you're going to get from a hen. And for every hen that lays 7 eggs that are fertile, you're probably going to have another one that's laid 2 eggs that are fertile that will take a couple of chicks, another one that's clear. So it all boils down to how you're going to manage that population effectively. And artificial incubation is one of those techniques to help maximize your output, probably far more than worrying about whether it was sunny last Thursday or whether it was rainy. Get an incubator.
Problem is with an incubator, if a chick hatches and you're at work, you've got to get it under a head to get it fed quite quickly, haven't you? If it hatches at 11 a.m. in the morning and I'm in the office, or people are out for the day, does the
your your chicks shouldn't be hatching in your incubator. They should be going into a hatcher to hatch and being an incubator to be incubated. There's two different things.
That's right. I've never done this before.
So if your chicks are hatching in your incubator, they're aerosolizing, if you like, bacteria and are a risk to the other eggs. So if you have just got an incubator, you're going to have your eggs dated and timed. You're going to go through and go, oh, this one's fertile. Ditch the ones that aren't after you've got that time period. And you know that egg X, Y, and Z, they're going to hatch today. They're on day 18 or they're on day 17. You're going to look at your hens and go, that hen's got a nest of clear eggs, right? You're going to have the fertile ones today. And those chicks that are imminently due to hatch, and again, your eggshell consistency will change. The air cell in that is going to get bigger when they're due to hatch as well, because you're going to get air creeping through there as they pip through into, then their internal pipping, as it were. That egg is going to change in nature. You're going to know it's going to hatch. So even just by date alone, up to day 17, it's back under a hen. And then you've got it covered. It's not going to hatch. It's going to come out and be fed by the hen because you've chosen a foster hen that you think is going to work. Your incubator is just for incubating your eggs without contaminating them from a hatched chick.
Okay. So you'd recommend an incubator for breeders?
Oh yes. If you want to maximise your productivity and stop all these latter eggs in the round from being pooed on and everything else, yes. And you have some hens that lay 7-8 eggs. Can they effectively brood or 7-8 eggs easily? So if you said, what, the first 4 eggs you can keep, I'll have the rest.
But you wouldn't just move them under another hen that's perhaps only got 4 eggs and take some of hers away. You'd go the other route. And
well, you could do that, but you're reliant then on having a hen that's ready at that stage with clear eggs that you can foster under. And what I'm saying is, if you don't want your hen to be incubating all 7, you either want to. I guess you've either got to wait until you can assess the fertility before you move them away partway through incubation. I guess that's one option. Equally, you don't want to be fostering eggs over a foster hen that are clear that aren't a lot of point either, because you're just giving her extra burden for no apparent reason. So to some extent, if you do take and incubate, the eggs you're going to be moving across. Okay, if you chose to do it early on or later on, you're moving viable eggs across versus messing about with clear eggs that are just, again, an extra burden on a hen that's trying to sit on the eggs that are fertile.
Okay, well, that's interesting. As I say, I've never used an incubator. I'd really, I just wonder whether I should now just have a go with one, just to see whether I can boost the numbers, particularly for my better pairs.
I think everybody has always fostered birds around to optimise breeding they can get, and I think things. But again, it's down to the size and shape of budget that we've now got, in that people are looking at other ways of trying to maximise productivity because it's starting to fail. Incubation is one side of that. And the other side of that, of course, is having fosters specifically for that purpose. A lot of people now will be having, budgies of colour or a different variety, whose sole purpose is to rear chicks for my exhibition birds. I'll have a bank of 6 pairs of Lutinos, and what all their job is just to raise chicks for me. And every time they lay an egg, I chuck it in the bin and they get somebody else's egg. And that is becoming more commonplace, that we are having to rely on fosters, or like I say, artificial incubation, to try and get the output increase, because some of the bigger hens, they just play football with the eggs and they just can't complete the process normally themselves. So I guess it is a question of how you want to manage your birds to get the productivity out, and I guess what feels acceptable to you as a way of getting these birds to breed. And if they can't do it themselves, should you be breeding with them?
Okay. And okay, it's given me loads of food for thought. But I'm going to definitely get an incubator, I think, and have a play around with that. With moving eggs as well, is there? I often feel I've moved eggs part way through them being incubated, say at day 12. This hen's got 7 eggs, so I'm going to move 2 to this other nest where she's only got 2 out of her 6 that are fertile. I think I've addled eggs in the past by moving them. Are there windows in which And can you just let us know what times they are? Presumably you can move them quite early. Is there a particular point past which you don't want to touch eggs and just leave them in the, ideally leave them
I would be ideally moving, before they've started to form, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
In other words, freshly laid egg, that can be moved across. The risk of contamination is minimized. The embryo hasn't started to develop yet, so they're a bit more resistant to movement at that stage. And obviously at latter stages they are as well. But partway through development, if you're putting force on the egg or torsioning the egg, you can disrupt a developing embryo quite happily. So realistically, if you're going to foster eggs, do it at the very start, do it at the very end, but in the middle, try and leave them alone.
Excellent. Okay, that's good to know. I should be. I need, as you say, it's probably advisable just to leave the birds alone. I think sometimes, as long as I think perhaps a lot of us are guilty of pushing eggs around with egg handlers and maybe just bothering hens more than we should do.
Yes.
Ivermectin versus noromectin. I've got this one. I shan't show it. Well, you can't see so that's the blue stuff. That's the stronger stuff, which is 0.5. What's the best rate for Ivermec or noromectin? What's the optimum rate?
Okay.
Would you say, which you should apply that to the bird? Do you know those figures off the top of your head? Sorry.
So the ivermectins as a drug class are very useful to us in terms of dealing with external parasites. And ivermectin is the drug within that we use. There are a series of brand names for that out there, and there's different formulations and different concentrations available. There are formulations that are designed for in-water use or drenching, for sheep, for example. But they are in a different carrier to those that are designed as pour-on, or even the injectable forms. They have to be in a different carrier to be effective. So if you're looking at getting an ivermectin from an agricultural merchant or online, you've got to make sure that it's diluted in the right product for the right way you're going to give it. My advice, if you're going to be using ivermectin, use a spot-on preparation, use it at 0.1% in propylene glycol, which you need to have it mixed in. There's lots of clubs and fanciers out there that are mixing themselves using the wrong mixing agent, which inactivates the ivermectin, basically. So you do need it in propylene glycol, 0.1%, and that works out at 1 drop per budgie, and that works a treat. And I know the bird's had it because I physically put it on the bird.
You put it on. And would you put it on the nape of the neck or on the foot? Does it matter?
Nape of the neck is fine.
Fine.
Yep.
Okay. One question I have. I've always fogged my birds. The birds love the water, and I do fog round a product just to try and keep the dust down, which is one when I go in the bird, which is important to me. But also just trying to keep as a disinfectant, trying to keep the kind of viral, is it the viral load or the amount of virus in any bacterial or viral stuff in the air down. Would you kind of recommend that, or am I wasting my time theoretically?
No, absolutely. A lot of the diseases we've been talking about, the polyoma, the PBFD, the chlamydia, these are transmitted in dried airborne particles, as it were, either be feather dust or feces in the case of chlamydia. So anything you do to stop the, I guess, aerosolization of particles into the air is of a bonus. So if you were, for example, going to clean out your aviary today, going in there and dampening down everything before you started to limit the dust production is going to be great at stopping disease transmission. And if you chose to use something that had an antibacterial, antiviral effect, well, then that's fair enough. You could do that. You'd still want to disinfect after you'd cleaned, but that wouldn't do any harm. And the foggers are a similar sort of aim in that you're trying to reduce the amount of infectious particles in the air by trapping them with moisture and dragging them down to floor level. So foggers are fine. It's a question of whether your birds are used to it and whether, again, you can have an effective sort of control with that. And again, if you're looking at wooden cages and setups, again, can that fogger effectively get those particles into that wooden cage as easily as you would like? And I suppose for me, the foggers and things like that is, if I'd cleaned out my aviary completely and had it cleared out, I could fog the room easier because I know it's going to get everywhere in that room because it's pretty clear. When it's full of gubbins and clutter and other bits and pieces in there, it probably isn't going to have the wide-reaching effect I'd like it to.
Okay. I'm not wasting my time anyway. So.
Oh no,
my birds love. Yeah, and I mean my fogger's got it's like a pest control one, so it's not just pumping it up in the air. I'm gunning it at the birds. So providing I'm sort of pointing it on the cords, it does seem to get in there.
Yeah.
So I must ask you about egg-bound birds as well, because this is another common problem. Is that an issue with the calcium? What's the causation of that, please, for hens suffering with that? Is that
can be a variety?
Yeah,
variety of things, John. You probably would be blaming calcium to some extent for that, and vitamin D, because that boils down to eggshell quality and their ability to contract their muscles, which is calcium dependent. Do that. So calcium is probably fairly high on your list, and you do get issues with egg malformation, for example, that could lead to that, or oversized egg or yolker egg, for example, might make the hen a bit more difficult for the hen. But the vast majority will have a metabolic element in there as well, and your calcium and vitamin D is part of that. Like I said, that's why you want to have a little tub of a liquid calcium and D3 supplement handy for those hens in those circumstances. And I do know some breeders, for example, will actually routinely medicate their birds with D3 during the egg-laying cycle as part of that. They'll actually physically catch them and treat them. I don't think you need to go to that sort of length if you've got your soft food sorted out, but you do need to have something on standby for them.
Fine. Brilliant. And with canker as well, I know we come back to that slightly. And the most, just to explain for people who perhaps haven't had it before, what the common symptoms are. I always know it as a fishy breath and kind of wet round the mouth, and very very rapid weight loss across, say, 48 hours. Is that's right, isn't it? I'm not missing anything there.
No, that's if you got those sort of signs, I would be reaching for treatment for trichomonas at that time. But as a matter of urgency, and I would be going for metronidazole directly by crop tube in preference to in-water treatment.
Fantastic. Well, Kevin, I've bombarded you with questions, and you've been brilliantly, you've expertly, of course, answered it for nearly 2.5 hours. I think I've run out of questions. I never run out of questions, but I think I've run out of questions for once. Can I thank you for this evening, and for being amazing? As I say, there's been so much useful information in there, and I'm sure all our forum members will be reviewing those, and we'll have some other questions. But hopefully we've covered everything.
We covered a bit of everything, I think, tonight.
Yeah, I think we've got it all in there, and I know it's, as I said at the outset, I know that all these topics you can just talk about for 3 or 4 hours. They're not straightforward. So I hope we've managed to sort of answer them in quite in short answers for people to at least give them something to go away and think about and perhaps work with. But thank you very much, Kevin. I really appreciate your time this evening. And as I say, yes, on behalf of everyone on the EBF, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for inviting me, John. Thank you very much indeed.
Cheers.